Okay, I think we're ready to go. Thank you so much for waiting.
No worries. Apologies for that interruption. As I was mentioning, we are thrilled to have Deputy Mayor Kine here with us, who will answer members' questions, but also provide updates on school reopening. And with no further ado, Deputy Mayor, I'm going to turn it over to you. And then following opening remarks from Deputy Mayor Kine, we will go through a 5-minute round of questions for each member. That will include your questions and responses from the Deputy Mayor before we wrap up with this portion. So Deputy Mayor, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chairman Parker, and congratulations to the new student representatives. And thank you all very much for hosting me this evening. Looking forward to our discussion. I actually thought that I would focus mostly on the letter that you sent to the Bowser administration and the mayor last week and some responses, because it seemed to me that it raised a lot of really vital issues around reopening. So I'll just spend a few minutes there, Mr. Chairman, if that's okay. And then we'll be really excited to answer questions and engage in discussion. So firstly, I just wanted to share that we were really happy to get your letter last week and its recommendations. And while I think, as will become clear, the Bowser administration doesn't support all of your recommendations, we truly appreciate your efforts and your advocacy as we've collectively worked to safely reopen schools. We are really all in this together, and the state board is a really critical part of the collective effort. So thank you. And as I'm sure you have all seen as you visited schools over the past few weeks, and this week in particular, schools are successfully reopening. There's lots of happiness and joy among students and educators, certainly that I've seen, and I'm sure you've seen in school communities. Our safety protocols appear to be solidly in place, and we have so far seen very strong enrollment and attendance across schools, which I think is all cause to celebrate. At the same time, we know that we have to be vigilant, and we know we have lots more work to do to keep students and educators and staff safety front and center. So we'll continue to adapt to these unprecedented times, and as I said, we'll continue to adapt together. Let me take some of your recommendations in the spirit of discussion and conversation. Firstly, you're recommending a virtual option be made available to all families. And there, I know that many families have chosen to send their students to schools. I know some families remain anxious. I've heard from some, you've heard from some, and we continue to work with all families to alleviate those concerns. At the same time, we are planning on maintaining our policy of a medical-only exemption for students to access full-time virtual. And the reason that we're doing this is because in the first instance, we do believe that in-person schooling is safe. This is supported by public health leaders. It's supported by the CDC and the American Academy of Pediatrics, our very own DC Health. And so we believe it's safe. Secondly, we know not just can schools be safe, but also in-person schooling is necessary. And I really mean necessary to mitigate any widening opportunity gaps. That research has come in across the country, it's come in locally. The evidence is clear that students who are in a virtual posture, for many of them, they are not obtaining the same kind of learning as is accessible to them when they're in person. We also know schools in person are essential for social emotional well-being and development of students. And that's a third reason why we're maintaining this posture. And lastly, and probably least importantly, but nonetheless important, is the fact that for many schools, and we learned this over this past year, doing hybrid will diminish the quality of both in-person and virtual learning as educators really work heroically to try to do both. And so we are, as I said, maintaining the posture. You had a recommendation about attendance, about adjusting attendance policies to permit additional excused absences. And here we actually think, and I'd be interested to talk with you about this, but we believe that the current attendance policies actually do a good job of sustaining high standards while providing no undue hardship for students related to COVID. So there are attendance codes for those who need to quarantine on a temporary basis at home. and there are attendance policies which allow for both synchronous and asynchronous modes of remote instruction, depending on what the LEA is delivering. And so we do think the attendance policies as they're currently written are strong and clear and maintain the kind of standards that we are wanting to maintain. You have a recommendation on CFSA referrals and suspending referrals to CFSA for COVID-related absences. And here, I wanted to share that we don't plan on adjusting that, but also here again, I'd like to have the discussion with you to ensure there's full understanding, because CFSA, we believe, is providing a really vital supplemental support to schools as they work to engage and re-engage youth and families. So referrals to CFSA in the first instance go to their triage unit, which basically does a really good job of trying to locate students in some cases where the schools cannot. And once located, in almost all cases, that information goes back to the school for the school to continue their engagement. It is very rare, and it is only in rare cases where there is true educational neglect that there's any kind of risk of a sanction for a family. You have a solid recommendation on testing. You'll have seen, and I think this was subsequent to you sending your letter, that we did transition to an opt-out model. We are still intending to do 10 to 20% sampling, which we believe is scientifically appropriate. And of course, as we move through, if it seems like we need to expand that, per the recommendation you've made, we will continue to consider that. Vaccinations, you're recommending youth vaccinations. We agree, and I certainly agree, that vaccinations are really our strongest tool to stop the spread of COVID-19. And so we've been encouraging all youth who are eligible to get vaccinated. You'll have seen the number of sites across the city where we have continued to focus on providing incentives and certainly are continuing to push this through LEAs. So we'll continue to monitor that. And of course, we'll continue to consider the recommendation that you've made about a mandate for young people. I think the last couple of points that you raised that I wanted just to share agreement on includes the critical nature of ensuring mental health and social and emotional well-being. We've talked before about the investments that we've made in mental health supports for schools and certainly for the school-based clinicians and other technical assistance for schools, and then some specific services for families and for educators that we've stood up this year. So I think we're in full agreement on that importance. And we're also in full agreement on the importance of innovative use of outdoor spaces. And I know you have been very, very vocal on this important point, and I appreciate it. We have spent quite a bit of funding and resources on outdoor equipment. OSSI has a resource website and technical assistance for schools to continue to promote this. And we are right beside you in encouraging all schools to continue to promote the use of outdoor spaces. Mr. Chairman, I wanted to conclude very briefly on recovery. So not in direct response to your letter, but also as we do reopen schools and we look to the next several years and we work to keep our students safe, we are also focused on trying to ensure that there are no negative consequences for our students and young people because of the pandemic. And in that regard, we did run a number of successful summer programs I wanted to name, including our summer schools at our charter and DCPS campuses, our DPR Boost Camp Summer Youth Employment Program. Very shortly, we'll be announcing the grant recipients of our high impact tutoring grants, which will be of great interest to many of you to build capacity amongst community-based organizations for schools that want to engage with them. We remain focused on safe passage and we're reviewing the applicants for our Safe Blocks program to staff more people in the streets as our students travel to and from school. And lastly, I'll just name that we continue to work with high schools to reimagine young people's pathways as we design and develop, in partnership with LEAs, the first ever Advanced Technical Center, which will provide CTE programming for all high school students across the city, regardless of what school they attend. And as we prepare to significantly expand our 12th grade work-based learning opportunities. So we continue to focus on recovery and trying to build the best system we can for our students as we continue to work to keep our students safe. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my opening remarks and some responses to your fine letter. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you. I'm sure there will be follow-ups from members. And let me correct the record members. I said 5 minutes. You all are going to only have 3 minutes, and we're going to have to stick to that time, just given that we have a short window with the deputy mayor. So with that, I'm actually going to prioritize our student representatives first, should they have any questions. And then I'm going to propose that we go in reverse order, prioritizing representatives Reed, Thompson, then Sutter, so on and so forth. So student members, if you have a question, could you raise your hand and we will call on you. And I'm seeing Representative O'Sullivan first, so feel free to go.
Thanks, President Parker. Good to hear from you again, Deputy Mayor Kine. My first question was about like relaying when positive tests happen. I've sort of been out of the loop on this, but I just wanted to know, what is like DCPS's approach for letting families know if someone tests positive, and what is like the close contact like situation with contact tracing? How is that determined?
Thanks for the question. And this has been a really, really important part of our preparation work. So in the first instance, DCPS schools, and this is true for all of the charter schools that I've spoken to about this, if there is a positive case in a school, they do let the school community and families know that there has been a positive case in the school. And then separate from that, if there's a positive case in a school and other members of the school community who've been identified as close contacts get direct outreach from the school as well. So they know that it's important for them to stay home and quarantine as the school makes arrangement for the remote instruction. So we've approved specific templates that DCPS is using to make those communications. The contact tracing is done across the entire city now with very specific staff members in the schools who've been trained in contact tracing. And so they are the ones who follow the DC Health guidance to understand in the first instance who are the close contacts, because the guidance shifted over the summer. They then coordinate with a central team at OSSI, which we've expanded quite significantly, to double check that they're giving the right advice. And also that's a place they can go if they have additional questions about it. So the school personnel are the first point of reference for this contact tracing. And then secondly, the OSSI team centrally is the second point of reference. And then the OSSI team, just to get into the weeds a little bit, does the close coordination with DC Health to ensure that there's quality assurance. And so DC Health follows up if it needs to.
Okay, thank you. Because part of my concern, and this leads into my next question, is at my school in particular, I heard in a town hall recently that the head of school would be making the decision about who is deemed as a close contact. I find that somewhat problematic because our school is a middle school and high school, and we're all walking through hallways at the same time. So if a middle schooler tests positive, you know, there's a good chance a high schooler tests positive, but we may not be alerted to that. And I wanted to see sort of what is your guys' plan for working with charter schools in particular in the time you have left?
Yeah, so on your walking through hallways point, you know, one of the key things to know about the close contacts is it's got to be 15 minutes. You know, that's the standard CDC, DC Health guidance. And you can get all of that information on coronavirus.dc.gov, as I'm sure you know, Alex, given that you follow this. So it's worth looking at that. And in terms of the principal being the primary person, that means that the principal will be adhering to the very specific DC Health guidance and will be then reporting back to OSSI and DC Health what they've determined, so that is being checked as well. So it's not the case that there's any individual in a school making these decisions in isolation. Very quickly on the charter question, we've recently invested some significant additional resources to ensure medical personnel, additional medical personnel are provided into charter schools and/or stipends are provided. And as I said, we've expanded the central OSSI capacity so that they have robust, quick turnaround time from all the charter LEAs as they do for the DCPS schools.
Thank you.
Representative Lopez.
Thank you, President Parker. My question relies about testing and the data. How much of this data is going to be given to the students? Because I know that some of my peers at school have been a bit uneasy about their safety and if students are vaccinated or not. So how much of this data will be shared with us?
Thank you for that question. I think another extremely important question. So the testing data is all going to be publicly available, meaning we are planning on reporting out what the results are of our testing programs across the schools. We do not currently capture at the individual student level who's vaccinated and who isn't. And so that's not data that we actually have to report out on.
Thank you. That was my only question.
Awesome. Other student member, Representative Johnson.
Thank you, President Parker. It's a pleasure to be here. My question geared toward you for today is how do we make sure that our students have a safety guarantee? I talked to a lot of my peers, and as far as being virtual, I noticed that you said the response to the proposal for a hybrid or fully virtual option for all interested families, DC schools will be moving forward with in-person schooling. I know that a lot of my peers are very nervous to be back in person, and like Representative Sullivan has mentioned, there are sometimes mask guarantees with high school and middle school students. Sometimes they don't really keep their masks on. And like my school as well, in the hallways, it's pretty close and similar, and everyone's all close together. So it's kind of nerve-wracking, to be honest, as a member of the youth. And so I just wanted to know your thoughts and your opinions on it. Thank you.
Thanks so much for sharing that. And I feel like I've been to a number of schools this week as well, where I've observed some sort of gathering, of students as they enter and exit. And certainly as they transition. We've been very, very clear with school leaders, and I was just talking to the chancellor about this as well, that we've got to ensure that adults in the school communities are doing the best job possible of keeping students at some social distance as they travel. And I think it's important that all of us, including students, actually ensure that we're playing our part to just, take the step back, to remain as distant as possible. And if you feel uncomfortable with a process in your school, that you're raising your hand to let the school leadership know that. I'm certainly happy to play a part in that. I'm sure the chancellor is as well. I don't know what school you're at, Ms. Johnson, but be happy to try to help coordinate that. But we are absolutely committed to ensuring that young people and educators and staffs are safe. And if there are things in the school that you feel uncomfortable with, we'll work with you to fix them.
Thank you so much. So I also wanted to know, how are we tracing the close protocols? So when students are in close contact, how are we measuring this? In my opinion, I hope that this comes out clear. Also, another question that I had was just because, to be clear, only students that will be medically exempt are able to have the hybrid schedule?
Yes, to be clear on that point, students with a medical exemption or a specific note from their doctor saying that they are unable to be in person for medical reasons are eligible for a fully virtual option. So rather than hybrid, they can then be in the fully virtual option. On your contact tracing question, there it's done in a couple of different ways. Most importantly, when a positive case is identified, the initial contacts at the school does an interview with that person to understand what their movements were, who they were with, how they traveled through the school, and so on. And in most instances, at least this is true for DCPS, and again, several of the charter LEAs that I've spoken to, there are also seating charts that are available. So teachers are spoken with, seating charts are looked at, and in that way, there's an investigation done to determine who are the people that fit the definition of close contact according to DC Health.
Thank you.
Awesome. Seeing no other questions from student representatives, I'm going to go to Representative Reed.
Thank you, President Parker. In all my years of schooling, I can only arrive to one word for the rollout of this plan, and it's raggedy. May 26th, there was an East of the River roundtable where 20 or so East of the River residents took our time out and asked for a virtual option should case count go back up. No response. On August 23rd, after fielding conversations from 3 Ward 8 parents, I sent a letter to this administration. No response. On August 25th, the State Board of Education wrote a letter to this administration. No response until today at 4:47 p.m. That is raggedy. I just want to tell you some of the stories that I've heard, and it's an inclination that some of these issues are just Twitter parents or social media parents. Since the plan was rolled out last week, or whenever it was rolled out, I've been fielding calls from real parents with real issues, and I'd like to share some of those. Miss Jordan has 2 immunocompromised adults, in her house. One with stage 4 lung cancer. She is waitlisted at the only 2 options in DC, which are KIP and Friendship right now. She really wants to go to a DCPS school, but she can't make that choice because there's no virtual option. Miss Bowles is assisting her daughter. They have a multi-generational household where the baby and an unvaccinated kindergartner will share the same space. The Bell family, she shares a bed with her unvaccinated youth. She said if she gets sick, she can't go to work. She went to go visit her type B classroom and she said her students are sitting on top of each other. Aisha Jennings lost her seat in response to our current attendance policy because she said she wasn't convinced or she wasn't comfortable with COVID. And her students were honor roll students after engaging in a virtual option last year. Cynthia Skurlock, she gave school a try on Monday. She said social distance wasn't happening and she's losing sleep. There is an anonymous parent that I talked to, and I won't give her name because it's for anonymous purposes, but she was battling COVID when I talked to her on Friday, catching her breath, trying to advocate for her child to get a virtual option and trying to figure out things because nobody had communicated to her how her son should quarantine. The only concession given from this administration was, to be frank, something that Ward 8 families weren't really pushing for. We asked for a virtual option and we asked for the concession around attendance. And the only thing we were given was the opt-out or the opt-in, whatever it was. This is not equity. This is terrible. And I'm rapping, but as a former DC government employee, I had a responsibility to respond within 48 hours. And the fact that we got this letter from you at 4:47 with no concessions that reflect on these Ward 8 parents is terrible. And I let my parents know every time I talk to them. Thank you.
I am going to yield my time. Representative Reed, thank you for your testimony, but I'm going to yield my time, Deputy Mayor, so you can respond to Representative Reed's remarks.
Thank you. And thank you for sharing the stories. I think as far as the stories that you shared, I mean, they are very, very heartbreaking. And it sounds like there are so many families who are experiencing hardship. And, you know, my heart goes out to them. And I feel your emotion, and I just want to say thank you for sharing. As far as the policy goes, that was a policy made by city government and leadership in city government, which we felt was in the best interest of the collective student body across the city. And I understand that that may not be right for all individuals, and that's the policy that we came to.
Thank you. Members, we're going in, just to make the implicit explicit, I'm going in reverse order to prioritize our East of the River colleagues. I understand our at-large member also resides East of the River, so I'm going to go to Representative Thompson next, and then I'm going to go to Representative Patterson, And then Representative Sutter, I'm going to come to you and then go into in order. Representative Thompson.
Good evening. I think what you felt from Carlene was pain. Representative Reed was pain. Yeah, I get it. I don't know if I have questions. I think I more so want to put a couple of things on your radar. I've been to visit more than a few DCPS schools. I think that the guidance is insufficient, to say the least. I know there are holes. I think about classrooms like the one my mom is in, which is technically not a classroom because she's teaching interventions this year. I posted a picture of her classroom, which is really cute. It does not have a HEPA filter, even though students aren't supposed to be in it. So she'll be pushing into classrooms and trying to find spaces to teach outdoors. Her windows also don't open. The school was just built that way. That is actually true, not just for my mom's classroom, but for a lot of spaces that students are in, that DCPS guidance didn't purchase filters for because, you know, that was just a hole. I worry a lot. I can't get out of my head the press conference, the mayor's situational update, when Perry Stein asked the question, at what metric do we close? And the mayor pretty much said there wasn't a metric and that as long as we mirror community spread, we would remain open. But our numbers for community spread are red. And our kids east of the river are the least vaccinated. And we're most of the city. And not all of our teachers are vaccinated and not all of our principals are vaccinated. And, you know, we have multi-generational families. So I worry that there are holes that we don't see. I'm worried that we're not being responsive to how people live their lives. And we want them to continue to live safe lives. And so I think what you hear from Representative Reed is pain.
Thank you, Representative Thompson. Representative Patterson, I'm going to go to you.
Thank you, President Parker. Thank you, Deputy Mayor Kine, for being here this evening. Much like my East of the River colleagues, you definitely can feel their pain. I mirror their pain, being an East of the River resident, proud Ward 8 resident. I got to speak to one of the families that Dr. Carlene Reed referenced, the Jordans, trying to resolve their issue. So we are doing the best that we possibly can under the conditions that we have been dealt. But I also want to speak to the issue of when you do have parents who say, okay, I'm going to give this a chance. I'm going to give this an opportunity. I'm going to send my child back. And then some of the conditions in which some of the schools that I have been into in this first week of school, DCPS schools, the conditions have been horrible, sir, to say the least. First, I coordinated with one particular Ward 7 resident, and we had to post this on the internet to show that there were rat droppings. There were all type of things that was going on inside the school that showed a neglect for the conditions for children returning to school. I've entered a school and went into a library, and the floor was literally wet. Day one was wet, soggy. I stepped on it and my shoe and everything like that on top of the shoe got wet. That's how soggy. And this was in the library where there were books. Above some of their most valuable books was a broken skylight. I posted that particular one because I thought it was so atrocious. I need to know from you, how do we prioritize ensuring that DGS is addressing all of the facility of things that they've had 18 months to do with children outside of schools, that it would not interfere with their learning whatsoever, yet and still we have backlogs of work orders in our DCPS schools that we should never send our kids to school in those type of conditions, especially when we've had those times to fix our schools. How do we coordinate with your office to elevate these, to make sure that they've been done? I've had numerous council members who's helped me with things with a leak at heart, and we got that resolved, but it shouldn't have to be that. How do we work with your office to make sure that these are elevated?
Well, thank you for the observations. I guess I will share that DGS has been working 24/7 for the past many months, and we've invested tens of millions of dollars in our school buildings. And I understand you've got some examples of places where things may not be up to the kind of standard that we would want to see. I can assure you that there are thousands and thousands of work orders and other situations across the system that have been dealt with. We've got new schools that have opened, beautiful renovations that have been completed, HVAC systems that have been thoroughly modified, filters in all of our schools. And so I do think that there has been a lot of extraordinary work and effort put into our facilities in DCPS. And I've been on daily calls with DGS, monitoring the progress, and the progress has been very, very significant. Have all the work orders been completed? No. And you're pointing out, I think, some very good examples of where they haven't. So certainly anyone in the administration, me included, will be happy to help work to ensure these kinds of issues are resolved. So you just need to share them with me, and I'll follow up on them. And I do want to give credit where credit is due. There's been an extraordinary amount of work put into these buildings, and lots of really, really wonderful progress made.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. I look forward to working with you.
Representative Sutter.
Thank you. Thank you to Deputy Mayor Kine for being here. So I have 3 questions. One is about sort of broadly policy as written versus policy as implemented. I think we're all seeing the same recommendations in policy you're talking about, but we're not seeing it implemented in the building. And I'm wondering what the process is for a continual review of whether policy is being implemented as written. So for instance, HEPA filters in every room seems to mean HEPA filters in instructional spaces, but not necessarily in pull-out rooms. Or patient care technicians at entrances may mean 2 patient care technicians for 400 or 500 students, which I don't think any of us would agree is adequate for flow in the morning. So can you talk about the review and update you all do on implementation versus policy as written?
I'm not sure I fully understand the question given the different examples that you've given. So for example, the patient care technicians, every school was assigned 2 for DCPS, as you know, and additional training was provided to other staff members to help support the work of that, depending on the school size. That was considered to be the equitable approach to ensure that every facility had at least 2 trained folks to be able to help work with flow in the morning and other COVID-related matters. So if it's the case that a school believes it does not have the resource it needs to do screening in the morning, that gets elevated internally through DCPS, and they have a way to work to resolve that. So I think that would be that example. On the HEPA filter point, I don't know what specific policy you're referring to. The policy says that air quality conditions in the schools need to be strong and good, and DCPS developed a plan and it implemented that plan. As I said, it spent millions and millions of dollars to do that. And so I'm not sure what the specific policy is you think that's not being met there, but I'd be happy to hear from you about what that is.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll come to my second and I'll send you an email more specific about my first. The second is about the close contact and testing as CDC recommendations in our policy versus the way our families are to feel comfortable. So I've seen this referenced in the education media quite a lot, that they say lots of schools are doing more quarantining than the CDC recommends. And I noted to one reporter in particular, DC is doing that. We are following the CDC recommendations, but our parents don't feel comfortable. Can you talk about how you might adjust policy to go above and beyond CDC guidance in order to make sure all our families feel safe and continue to send their children back to schools?
I think the approach that we've taken in the city is really led by DC Health and the scientists in DC Health. And I think we are very, very fortunate to have the health officials helping to guide our pandemic response that we do. DC, I think, has done relatively well compared to a lot of other places, given the guidance that we have been pursuing. And we continue to do that as the guidance documents get updated, as the specific guidance gets updated. And the DC Health guidance, which adheres to CDC, is guidance which we believe is effective and is carefully monitored. So in that sense, we are working through DC Health and its approach, through our approach to schools, in ways that I hope will give residents confidence that we'll continue to address the pandemic in the ways that we have that have been very successful relative to other jurisdictions. So I'm not sure if you have a recommended change to the DC Health guidance that you'd like to see. Certainly, I think we're always open to those kind of ideas that are scientifically based. DC Health does lots of engagement with the scientific community and others on that topic. But I do think that's how we work to build confidence. And I think we have a very credible response.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I agree we're aligned with the science. I'm not sure we're aligned with the comfort and asks of families, as many of our charters are doing more testing than the CDC recommends. But I appreciate the responses. My time is up.
Thank you. We're going to go to Representative Bowie and then Representative O'Leary. And Deputy Mayor, I appreciate the thoughtful responses. I'm going to encourage us to monitor the clock just so we can make sure we can fit everybody in before you have to leave. So Representative Bowie, I'm going to come to you, or Bowie, sorry.
It's not really a question, it's more so a comment. Listening to like what everybody's saying, I wanted to respond to Mr. Patterson's answer. I'm going to be totally honest, Deputy Mayor, I don't really like the answer you gave him, because he said like the building was water on the floor, rat droppings, and then you responded with, well, we put tens of $millions into buildings. That has nothing to do with what Mr. Patterson said. And I just don't like the answer that you gave him. And I think you could do a little bit better on that. It just wasn't the answer I was looking for. You gave us an answer to another school's problem, saying $10 million. So if you are putting $10 million, there's no reason why there should be water on the floor on the day one. So yeah, that's all I wanted to say.
I appreciate the feedback. Thank you.
Okay, Representative O'Leary.
Good afternoon or good evening. I have a question first about how the buildings are. In Ward 4, we have a lot of new buildings, and they still have some HVAC problems and some leaks. And they've had them since they were opened, and nothing has been done. I know that we've spent all this money, but nothing's been done. We also have some older buildings in Ward 4. And I'm going to use Whittier Elementary as an example. I went on the walkthrough. I've been in Whittier a lot, but I went on the walkthrough 2 weeks ago, and it was deplorable. The staff works really hard. The parents are really involved, and the building is just, you wouldn't send your child there. And I've mentioned it to the director of DGS. He said he was going to go by Whittier. He hasn't gone by. I talked to the mayor this weekend about it, and she was going to go by Whittier, and she hasn't gone by. And then we need to have somebody there to be proactive to fix these buildings that are falling apart, because they're not equitable buildings. The students that go to brand new buildings like West Elementary right across the street from my house are extremely fortunate to go to a wonderful building like that. It's brand new, it's fabulous. but every child in the city should be able to go to a building that's safe and secure and healthy, because the teachers and the staff really want to help them. And is there how do you find out about those buildings besides finding them out from us at a meeting or anything? Is there a hierarchy when a principal sends a work order to DGS and it gets lost for years? Does anybody say anything? Does it die there?
It does not die there. The work orders are tracked by both DGS and by DCPS, and DCPS's facilities team does, I think, a good job of staying on top of the DGS work orders that they've submitted. And there are some, I know, that take longer than others to get addressed. But I have been involved in countless conversations over the past several months as we've worked through, as DGS has worked through a number of issues a number of issues across all of these buildings. And
but the buildings are they had all summer long to fix buildings so that at the end of August, when we went through walkthroughs at the schools, or the parents brought their children on Monday to the schools, that there wouldn't be those problems. And there's still those problems, especially in the older buildings. I've got one, I don't know, I'm done. I guess I'm finished with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Weidenberg.
Hi, thank you. Hi, Deputy Mayor. I know it feels like everybody's piling on, and I'm going to do some as well. It's hard not to pile on when there's not a recognition that these are serious problems. I know people have worked hard. I know that an enormous amount has been invested. I also know that people go into the schools and the HVAC's not working, and we got to have some acknowledgement of this. So I just want to say that as part of explaining my approach. I want to say one thing about Representative Reed's comments, and then I want to go to some issues that we haven't talked on. On Representative Reed's points, I just want to say it seems like the administration is clearly deciding what the trade-off is. Health is here, and what you regard as the quality education is there. And I get that. I also think, families need some ability to determine their trade-offs. And I just want to say on the virtual option, nobody is asking to get rid of in-person school. I want in-person school to stay open, and my next suggestions are about that. But I don't understand, and I don't think anybody understands why it is that I think there's 80 or 100 people taking a virtual option. Why can't that be 500 people or 800 people if that's how many people there are that have immunocompromised folks at home? I just don't understand that. So that's one I just want to put out there as a virtual option. Let me say one other thing. You talked about other, I think in response to Representative Sutter, what are some things you might propose? So let me say a couple. One, at some of the schools, and you've heard it from others, and the students are literally up against each other. There is not social distancing. Now, I know CDC says everybody else should have 6 foot of social distance, but students only need 3 feet. In some of these schools, kids have 1 foot or 1.5 foot, and they're sitting next to these people for an hour and a half, sometimes in double classes. They're sitting next to them for long periods of time during lunch. People are scared. So 2 things. One, I understand that you feel very confident in these health protocols and these rules, but I wonder if upfront in the beginning, you could increase the amount of testing to way over 10% and to more than once a week, just at the beginning, to verify for everybody that indeed these are working. So we don't have to wait until there's some kind of spread. I think that would really help the confidence level. I also want to say one thing about outdoors. At some of these schools, the only way to get kids out of those really crowded situations is outdoors. I really, really hope that we can get some furniture out to people. I realize there's supply chain issues, also some Wi-Fi so people can really go out there. And then the last thing that I think would help a lot of this, at least at the upper grades, is I do think we should have mandatory vaccines for the students. I also think we should have that for the staff at this point. Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Chang.
Thank you. Hi, Deputy Mayor. I think as I'm listening in, what I'm hearing beneath people's words is that we're really asking from you and your office some more empathy with the lived experiences of the students and the families that we represent. And so I think, like Representative Wattenberg started with, I think we also ought to extend that empathy to you. And I imagine you've been working all summer, late nights, and I appreciate how hard you've been working and your team. And I appreciate your explicit adherence to, particularly to evidence-based and scientific guidelines. What I'm noticing though, and this is, I think, less in Ward 2 where we live than elsewhere in the city, is that trust is breaking. And certainly your office is not accountable for all of the problems that are happening during this wild time. But trust is breaking. And if we are to do what you're asking us to do, to work together, work at this all together, right? I think we really have to be thinking about how we put more time and effort into building trust and building trust. And so I appreciate the opt-out move. I think that's a smart and very science-driven behavioral science move. But I have a concern still, right, around, I compare our schools not necessarily to the just other schools in the US, but also internationally. I mean, European schools like Berlin's are testing every single student. Their public schools are testing every single student 3 times a week, right? And we are very far off from that. And so I think, my immediate question to that particular piece is around the auditor's report that was posted shared in the Washington Post as well, that though we said we were aiming to do 10% in the spring, we were only able to get to 4%. And I wasn't sure if the mayor's office had put out a response to the report or when we can expect a response to that.
Thanks for the question. And we do take testing very, very seriously. And I think to your point about expanding it, at this point, DC Health, OSSI believe that 10 to 20% will give us the kind of information that we need in the early days of schools being open this fall, which is, that's sort of considered to be scientifically accurate. And if it turns out that we need to do more testing, we absolutely will. We've got the capacity to expand testing. So I think to your point, we can do more. At this point, we will be doing the 10 to 20%. On the auditor's report, we always take the auditor's report seriously. We look at the recommendations that have been made, and the auditor follows up with us on a periodic basis to see, what's happened to the recommendations. So that's the forum, I'm assuming, that you'll see response on that. In the case of testing, we've now shifted the overall protocol for it to the point where we are absolutely certain we will get to the 10 to 20% of unvaccinated students that we are planning for.
Thank you.
Vice President Gasoy.
Thank you so much, and thank you for being here, Deputy Mayor. So I just want to reemphasize, I think the word has come up several times, responsive, being responsive. I just think that is something that needs to be elevated more, to the point that many of my colleagues have made. So I guess my question though to you is, is there a rate of spread or a number of schools that are, or students that are quarantining that would lead either to a virtual stance, at least for certain school communities, or more testing?
So I think the mayor and DC Health have been fairly consistent since the beginning of the pandemic, and you'll be aware of this, not to anchor off a specific metric that would cause a transition into one state or another. I think in the current case of schools being open, you can have, in some senses, it's a very, very important and complicated operational question, because if schools are indeed open, you can have a large number of students in quarantine and still be teaching some in person and some virtually. So it's not the case operationally that you would necessarily need to flip to all virtual and keep your school community safe. If you have a number of teachers who are out quarantining, that's a different matter. DCPS has been explicit about its own program to address those kinds of circumstances, as have a number of the charter LEAs. But there are certainly circumstances in which it becomes untenable at some scale of folks that are quarantining to basically continue to try to run a hybrid or simulcast model. And so all the schools will be monitoring for that. And depending on what happens, that could happen, but it doesn't have to happen. I think in terms of your broader point around just safety and security and community spread, that's something that DC Health monitors daily. I was talking to Dr. Nesbitt today about this, and as they look at the confluence of factors, and if they feel they need to make a decision for the city about a different posture around various sectors in the city, including schools, they will do so, as they have done over the past year and a half.
Can I just quickly ask, why not do universal testing for unvaccinated members of school communities? I know that it's being done in LA now, which is a huge school district. We are a small one. I think this would help a lot of families, not all, but a lot of families feel safer. So why not do that?
Well, yeah, thanks for the comment. I've certainly heard that from a couple of your colleagues, and I read it before. I mean, it ultimately, DC Health and OSCE right now believe that we can accomplish the goal we want to accomplish with the 10 to 20%. And as I said, they're constantly reevaluating that. So we will continue to look at it to make a determination if we do need to shift that into something that is bigger. But right now, based on what we understand and what they understand about what's scientifically reliable, then that's the posture that we're in.
Okay, and I will send you some specific challenges I've been hearing. A lot of us have been hearing around the outdoor learning, which we are excited that there are resources for, but now there are like implementation challenges. So I will reach out to your office about that.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor, we are at 6 o'clock, which I believe was the deadline. Might you have 2 extra minutes that I could use to ask questions?
I have 2 extra minutes for you, Mr. Chairman.
Awesome. I will keep it as succinct as possible. I'm going to ask some pretty technical questions. I echo what Representative Reed shared in terms of the concerns I'm hearing from parents. I've told this story before. I heard from a Ward 5 parent who has a health compromised child and a healthy child. The healthy child has not received a waiver. And just want to hear more from you. What is being done to expand the definition of health need for families like this parent?
So just to reiterate, and thank you for the question again, to reiterate, DC Health, OSCE, administration leadership looked at the school reopening and made a determination that pediatricians would be able to determine for students in their care, individual students that would have specific needs for not being in school, and they would have access to a virtual option. And otherwise, students would receive in-person instruction. So that's the policy decision that we've made. And so as we go forward with school reopening, we are, as I said before, we're constantly monitoring what the situations are in school. We're listening to and hearing from families about their own circumstances, and we constantly reevaluate these kinds of policy decisions that are made.
Yeah, if I could offer a recommendation, I would strongly urge the administration to consider automatically triggering a waiver for all siblings in the same household when one child has a waiver, and or when there is a close relative, whether it's a grandparent or what have you, is in the household that has health issues. 2 other quick technical questions. I understand the administration not wanting to give, I don't necessarily agree with it, but I understand why the administration may not want to give a hard metric for triggering virtual learning for all students, or in other words, closing our schools. I do have concerns, though, that if we are going in the wrong direction in terms of community spread, how do we prepare parents for what might be inevitable, that at some point we may have to go back virtual? How is the administration wanting to kind of preempt that for families and community members?
I would actually flip that a little bit and say that, I think this fall, we're in a different position as a city than we were in March of 2020, when we were being confronted by the pandemic for the first time, and we effectively thought of all sectors in the city in a uniform way, and we basically closed the city. This fall, and at this moment within the pandemic, we are deeply prioritizing schools. The mayor has made it very, very clear that her number one priority is student learning and schools. And so at this point, I don't think any of us anticipates that we would need to flip the switch and turn the system virtual again. Of course, we've no real way of knowing over the coming months and years what this pandemic will turn out to be, how it will change. And so we've got to, as I said, continue to monitor the situation. We've got contingencies across the system and in all of our LEAs for virtual temporary offerings for all those who need to quarantine. Operationally, depending on the scale of those things, it may be the case that certain classrooms are virtual, or certain grades are virtual, or even ultimately certain schools are virtual. But right now, we don't actually anticipate that that will happen. And so,
Fair enough, but not to cut you off. And I just want to squeeze in this last question. I would also note that we wouldn't have anticipated having to go back to wearing masks and going under certain protections either. And so we can't anticipate what's going to happen in a few weeks or a month. Lastly, connected to learning, if you could just speak to how OSSI, the administration, and how you would encourage us to help monitor learning that is happening in school buildings. As you are well aware, we did away with standardized testing this year, which was the right call. And it is my understanding that all LEAs are submitting information to OSSI. Like, how are you all monitoring that, tracking to make sense of how learning is progressing across our different LEAs?
Yeah, thank you for the very, very important question. And as soon as we knew there would not be the standardized testing, we worked with OSSI to ensure that in the comprehensive education plans, there would be a requirement for the reporting out, first of all, the conducting of ongoing interim and benchmark assessments. Very, very importantly, that information will be made available to families so that families could understand how their individual students were doing, and that there would be reporting into OSSI on the outcomes of those benchmark assessments. And as soon as we've got the comprehensive view of that, we will of course be sharing that broadly with the city. It's complicated, as you all will know, because there are many, many different kinds of interim assessments that are given by LEAs as they can determine their own. So we're doing the scrubbing and work now to try to understand that. And I would say, as far as the state board's role and the work you all are doing with OSSI, I would say to continue to elevate the importance of doing those kinds of assessments insofar as they help educators understand the work that they need to be doing with their young people, insofar as they help families understand the progress that's been made, and insofar as they can help us as a city determine how we're doing and what more we have left to do.
Thank you. We will leave it there. Deputy Mayor Kine, I really appreciate you coming and sharing with us. Should we have additional questions, we'll be sure to follow up. But thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Members, thank you for very thoughtful questions. If there are additional items you would like the administration to respond to, please share it with staff and we'll be sure to forward it on. Next, we're going to switch gears and discuss the statewide literacy plan. And Representative Chang, I know this is something you've personally been passionate about. So I'm going to turn it over to you to tee it up. But what I will say is, OSSI, for members of the public, OSSI produced a statewide literacy plan, or a strategic theory of action, if you will, for how DC will advance literacy in our city. And we as a body are very interested in this, but also want to think about how we might enhance what OSSI has already produced. And so Representative Chang has already had a number of conversations with members of staff at OSSI, and we're going to engage in a brief discussion about what might be done here at the State Board. So with that, Representative Chang, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. And I think we just all need to, I need to take a quick breath after that, just to transition over. But thank you all for the, I think, you know, representing your constituents and raising concerns that I think all of us have been hearing. And President Parker, I think that the last hour deserves to have a debrief of some kind, if not today, then at the next session. Literacy. I just dropped in the chat a link to the OSSI page that has the plan. It is 126 pages, and it is, I think, really strong in how it's evidence-based and is citing the latest research. But just I want to first zoom out and then get more into the nitty-gritty with you all. But bear with me because I'll be talking at you for a bit. First I want to kind of go over the broad stuff and then get into very specific ideas I have, and would love your feedback, ideas for other steps that we could be taking as well as a board. So first and foremost, you know, I think you all agree with me that literacy matters. And if you haven't learned to read, you can't really read to learn, right? And the benchmark that we usually set for that is 3rd, 4th grade, right? And so groups like the Campaign for Grade Level Reading are really, really keen, and I think us as a city as well are keen to make sure that kids are reading proficiently by 4th grade. However, in 2019, only 30% of 4th grade students in DC performed at or above the proficient level in the NAEP exam in reading, ranking us 47th nationally. That is not something I think we should be proud of. And that's 30%, right? And I think that the plan for me really stands out this time around because of how far that number is from the goal we had set in the last plan, right? So in 2013, OSSI had put out a plan, a literacy plan with the goal of achieving at least 75% proficiency within 5 years, right? And 75% is not what we achieved, which is 30%. It is a big, big difference, right? And I just want to flag that, right? So this time around, we've got a new plan. It's a new 5-year plan, and it's attached to a $16 million federal grant to improve literacy for our students. And I think this is a really important opportunity for us to learn from what happened in the 2013 plan. Why weren't we able to achieve those goals, right? And think through how we can take these new federal funds, a new opportunity, a sort of blank slate, right? And build something that, and steer the ship in a way that can actually move literacy outcomes. So, okay, so that's the most macro level. I'm gonna go one level more micro now. Over the summer, I read through every single state's literacy plans, including ours, and have a few thoughts on just how ours stacks up in comparison, right? Ours is really evidence-based. It's strongly backed by the latest research, right? It is really doing, I think, the important work around thinking through what students actually need in order to learn how to read. But there's a few really big holes that I see, again, relative to other states. And I'm just going to give a few examples. So, but this is not the comprehensive list, right? So a lot of the other plans, including Arizona, Kentucky, Maryland, actually outline inputs and outcomes on a timeline, and ours does not, right? Their states will say, their state plans will say, literacy plans will say, by this date, we will have invested in, X dollars in Y, which will lead us to Z outcomes by this date, right? So that's one piece that ours does not do. Another piece is that we don't specify who is responsible for executing which part of the plan. And I think Alaska and Idaho do that best, of saying this particular actor is responsible for moving this particular piece of the plan, right? And I think it's a piece that ours does not clearly lay out. And then finally, I think this is something that really stood out for me too. Ours does not provide a rubric for how to measure the extent to which we've executed the plan or not. And I think Louisiana and Texas do that best. And so the questions that leaves me, right, include: who is responsible for executing this new plan? How will it be executed and under what timeline? How will we know if we're on track to successfully executing the plan over the next 5 years? So I'm happy to talk through more about sort of what I saw in other states, what I read through in ours. I appreciate that many of you actually gave me exactly that feedback on the plan when I had circulated it around when ALSI put it out earlier this summer. So I've been mulling over opportunities for the DCSBOE to engage around this, and I have a few ideas that I just want to run by folks. Would love your suggestions, feedback, variables even to assess sort of how we decide if and how we engage in this. And again, I'm learning from what other states have done, particularly from the states that have made the greatest literacy gains in the last 5-10 years, right? And so, so starting at sort of, again, a more macro level piece of work is to actually develop legislation. And this would be learning from states like Louisiana that passed Senate and House bills. It's Senate Bill 222, Senate Bill 216, and House Bill 85. And what they did in those was to reinforce the state's commitment to literacy and actually tie together all the various pieces. We in DC just passed our dyslexia bill, which requires a screener, among other things, right? But what this comprehensive legislation does in other states is it ties all the pieces together, right? So we've been doing things like, talking about teacher training. I've talked all of your ears off about how important it is for reading instructors to have been given the support in learning how to teach how to read that they seek. And what bills like Louisiana's do are put all of those pieces together and connect them, right, into one coherent plan. So that's one thing. Another thing I think is working to engage commitments from the various literacy stakeholders and developing more actionable steps aligned with the plan, right? I will say, and this was clear from the preface of the plan itself, the goal was not to lay out exactly which actors do what. And I think that, and part of that, there's reasons for that, most compelling of which I find gives LEAs the flexibility to decide, right, what's best for their specific community. But what I think that misses is, a very explicit ask for everyone who works on literacy in the city to join in steering the ship in one direction together, right? So engaging our constituents and educators within our constituency to think about how to develop more actionable steps is something that I'd also be interested in discussing and thinking about with you all. And then there's a piece around focusing in on particular demographics that weren't prioritized in the plan, right? So for example, adults are not prioritized in our plan in a similar way that they are in a lot of others, right? Several other state plans make it multi-generational plans, citing the importance, right, the causal link between adult literacy and the literacy outcomes of the children of those guardians and parents, right? And how important it is to be thinking about literacy education as a multi-generational effort is one example of something that is not highlighted in our plan that we could work on as almost an appendix or an addendum, right? And now I'm getting kind of more and more granular again. Another piece of this is focusing on the diagnostic work, right? And in particular, the question I have is, where are the dots connecting and where are the dots not connecting? So, and this is why I think a comprehensive piece of legislation like Louisiana's was actually very powerful, because working on the pieces in silos does not lead to the outcomes that we want to see, right? And I'll use the example about structured literacy training again. Again, you've all heard me talk about this. This is the reading instructors should have the opportunities to learn how to teach how to read, which I do not think is crazy, right? And the piece around this though is that if you go through that training, right, but the curriculum is not adapted and aligned according to what you've just learned, the outcomes are significantly lower than someone who goes to the training and, you know, makes the stakeholders come together and change the curriculum accordingly, right? And so when we take these various literacy interventions and do them in silos, they're not as powerful as when they're all combined in a coherent framework and a coherent effort. These pieces are all laid out in our plan at the higher framework level. And what I'm proposing is doing the diagnostic work to see how that's actually being implemented currently, right? What is the role of our community-based organizations right now in relation to, right? We've spoken with many of them, Reading Partners, Reach Incorporated. A lot of them came to talk to us, especially when we were discussing high dosage tutoring, right? What is the role that they play? How do we connect the dots? Another piece of this, these are the last two, I promise, and then I'll stop talking out to you, is around assessing progress, right? I mentioned that several other states have very strong frameworks to assess if they're on track to achieve their goals in 5 years. How do we as a board then potentially think about a role of tracking how we are implementing the plan and working with OSCE and educators to assess and support all the various stakeholders to make sure that we're on track. And then finally, I think there is the implementation piece that we could take on, right? To support the implementation of a specific part of the plan. This plan does talk about our reading standards, and it does talk about our reading specialist credentialing, which earlier this month, it is the first, I think a couple days ago then, OSCE just put out a new standard for reading specialist credentialing. And so working on that piece, right, and the reading curriculum itself and those standards is part of the part of the work that I think needs to be done, and is that the kind of work that we as a board want to take on. I would love to do all of this, and I think that as a city we need to be doing all of these things, right? So I will pause now and apologize for lecturing at you for the last several minutes. Would love your feedback, reactions. Are there pieces of the work that, are there other options for how we could engage and around this plan that you see the DCSBOE uniquely positioned to work on? Are there other ways that you see us working with various literacy stakeholders and our constituents across the city to actually make sure that in this next 5-year period, right, we are actually able to increase literacy outcomes? To me, that's the main goal, right? So would want to make sure that we as a board are engaging and supporting that work. And President Parker, I'll turn it back to you.
Awesome. So we're going to now have a conversation. I'm seeing a couple of members with their hands up. Representative O'Leary.
Yes, I have a question about, you mentioned two very important words with this plan, and that is to be connected and also to be coherent. I don't have a lot of faith in any plans that come out of the administration in any plan that's, I have faith in our social studies plan because it's not coming from them. But when you were talking about adult learners, I agree completely, but we need to work on little kids learning how to read. And there doesn't seem to be any kind of a plan. I don't know of any, and I'll use my experience of now it's 50 years in public education in DC of there ever being a program that would find out, like I was going to ask the mayor, the deputy mayor, but I didn't have time, about how shouldn't they be testing students right this week or next week on what level they read at? Pardon me for the ending with a preposition, but they, because, there are very valid tests that students can take at the beginning of the year that will give the teachers what reading level they're on. We'd be naive to think that our students read at their grade level in any grade numbers. But there isn't any plan to test students. We talked about this before the pandemic last year and before the schools were opened last August or whenever they opened, where they were going to open. Same question to Paul Kine about, is there an entrance test to find out about the learning loss? Now we're a year ahead of the learning loss that they had last year in just the last months of 2020 and school year, and we still don't know. Now the students are coming back, and I don't know about your ward, but man, my ward is packed with students. The students are out there all the time when I go by in the morning and in the afternoon. But what have they lost? How are they trying to find out? Are they just assuming that because they were in the 3rd grade last year and they're in the 4th grade this year that they've learned what they're supposed to learn in the 3rd grade? That's a totally incorrect assumption. I mean, this is a struggle. We need to make this, and reading is fundamental. I haven't made that up. All right. If you can't read, you can't survive in this world, period. End of sentence. And we're cheating our students because they're not learning how to read at all levels. Love you, Alice. Back at you, man. You did a great job, but we got to fight it. We got to put this out in public because parents need to say, I don't know what level my student reads on. What is the system doing to test that? Have you heard anything, Alistair?
This is I appreciate that. Representative O'Leary. I think where I'm thinking is more about what we do over the course of several years. And I think the question of whether or not we should be assessing our students, I think is a prickly one right now, right? And certainly we need to know who is reading at what level, right? And I think that, you know, one thing that is glaringly missing from this particular plan is a very clear discussion about what COVID has done to our students, right? And what that means in terms of both setting realistic expectations and goals for where we can move literacy outcomes in 5 years, and what that means we need to change in the way that we actually monitor, test, teach, implement, right, all of these pieces. And so I haven't heard more details than what you know, Representative O'Leary, around when we're going to run testing. But if the dyslexia advocates, the parent advocates around that group, you know, did something important, which was, you know, DIBELS is now one of our universal screeners, right? And I think that's very helpful. But just to kind of tie back to what I was saying, I've had a lot of reading instructors tell me they never learned how to interpret DIBELS, right? So you get a score, and someone who has learned how to interpret DIBELS can say, oh, this means that Johnny doesn't understand this particular element about decoding, versus, you know, an educator who doesn't get that training and might need to self-teach will just see a score and just have a broader sense of, you know, am I doing okay or not, right? So there's more pieces to that I think need to be unpacked as well.
Thanks.
Representative Thompson.
Thank you, Representative Chang, for you know, just continuing to swim in this. Not dive in seems insufficient because you've been in this. I want to double click on the adult literacy piece. I actually think that is particularly important because we largely have the same families over and over again who are not reading. And so I get, like, if I totally believe we want our little people to read. And I think it's super helpful if the big people in your household also can help you with that. And can, you know, in this choice city that we have, it seems like we have every choice but a virtual choice for our families. But in this choice city that we have, you need information to be able to navigate and get access to the best education and the best resources. And unfortunately, if we don't have adults that can do that for their young people, then they are perpetually at a disadvantage at every single turn. So I think that's particularly important. I know from conversations with Washington Literacy Center, there are some things that we can better align when it comes to how OSCE resources these programs. That really, and when I say that, I do mean like the adult literacy piece. We're not talking workforce development. We're not talking some of the other things. We literally mean programs that are teaching people how to read so they can access the other resources. So I think that's particularly important. I'll say the other part that I think is very much aligned to the work of the board is around teachers. And supporting teachers and making sure they have access. And we set standards around, you know, pre-service and in-service teachers when it comes to what they know about how to teach reading. And so I think that's a place where we can and should lean in. I wonder if there are, as we think about how these COVID recovery funds are spent, if there are some opportunities to think about that as far as an acceleration strategy that will pay dividends, not just now, but longer term, as far as preparing more of our teachers. And I just really appreciate, again, Representative Chang, you stand on top of this, but I think those are two opportune places for us as a board, or at least that I'd be interested in.
anything, Representative Chang? No?
Oh, no, thank you, Representative Thompson. I will just share one update from the that piece, which I don't think we've talked about yet. I think it happened while we were on recess, that the reading clinic, I've been talking with some folks from the reading clinic, and their budget request from DCPS went through. So they're actually going to be expanding their program, and they still have a wait list of teachers who want to participate in the program. And for the student representatives who weren't with us when we were talking about this last time, this is a homegrown DCPS program for more experienced reading instructors to teach less experienced reading instructors best practices. And it's been very high demand from educators to participate. They want to be better reading instructors, right? And a lot of folks are frustrated in how not prepared they feel with doing the work. And I think it's false to assume that if you know how to read, you know how to teach how to read, right? And so this program has been really popular, and I'm glad they got extra funding. And I think there's work that we can be doing to, I think, keep pushing that and think about, other ways that we can be supporting that work, supporting UDC's program, right? That does, I think, great literacy instruction work and et cetera, right? But expanding that piece, because the dearth right now is actually that we don't have enough experienced reading instructors to, guide less experienced reading instructors in the work. I'm a big fan of the Washington Literacy Center's work, and I've heard from multiple also of the folks from the charter schools that work with adults, actually, that they're getting a lot more folks who have actually graduated from DCPS with a diploma who are not reading at a 4th grade level, and that's scary.
Representative Sutter.
Thanks, President Parker. Thank you, Representative Chang, for all of this. We on the Ed Standards Committee got a little preview of all this, and so I am so excited that the full board is getting to engage now. I'll just say 2 quick things. One, I'm very excited about our ability to sort of help fill in gaps that we see in the plan, whether that be by suggesting sort of metrics to track progress and perhaps to report on that progress as we see it happen and gather data on that. The other thing I think makes sense for the state board would be to fit in some of the parts that are not, the gaps that are not connected. So to Representative Thompson's point, the adult literacy piece feels like a natural opportunity, as does libraries, given your own deep connection with libraries across the city. The one that I think would not be ideal for us is the implementation piece, simply because that's a thing I worry that we may not have capacity to do and to do well. So that's my 2 cents, but we'll keep this on the Ed Standards Committee's docket so that whatever work we do have has a home and a place to continually be supported as you move forward with it. Thanks for taking the leadership on this.
Thanks, and I'd love to. I think I have long responses for everybody, but I would love to hear everyone's thoughts first. So I guess Representative Johnson is up next on my screen.
Thank you, Representative Chang. When you told me and told all of us that it was a 30% proficiency rate, I'll admit that was very disappointing to be a student. As an everyday student, I just want to know, how will this action plan actually look in our classrooms? How are we ensuring that we are receiving quality resources and materials? I think that there's a strong need to hold these action plans accountable. If there was a percentage of 30% in 2021, but we shot for a 75 percentile range, what are we actually aiming for right now in terms of percentages? how will this look? And honestly, I really don't even know what to say about the 30%. I really don't, but thank you.
We'll talk more about that, Representative Johnson. Representative Reed.
Hi, guys. So I guess whatever approach we take, how do we come in it so that we stick this plan or whatever this commitment to literacy is sticks across administrations? As we know, OSSI could be subject to change any moment, the DME, you know, like how do we make like some longevity in this plan so that things don't fluctuate? So I feel like that could be a piece of whatever approach we take. And I'm following your expertise, Alistair. So happy to help. But then also thinking like, how do we make this work across like our LEAs? Thinking about some feedback from families about like, okay, when I go to one school, they're using this approach. And then I go to another school because of whatever, you know, either making a choice or a move or something. And, you know, there's a different approach to it. And I just wonder about continuity. Like I know there's a emphasis on getting students to try to stay in a particular school as, you know, as long as possible, but that's not the reality. So what is a state that we can do to, you know, get some continuity across settings? How do we, I guess, get meaningful and reasonable goals? And a piece of me wonders what is like the federal reporting requirement. I'm really familiar with on the SPED side, but what does it look like on the general education side? Because sometimes OSSI may have to set a certain data point, and they have a lot of explaining to do why they need to adjust these data points. And I'm just kind of curious, you know, how do we arrive to the, what was it, 75%, something crazy. But we know we don't even have incremental steps to like get there. And then I guess my initial hunch or kind of just talking to other people, it just seems like the biggest bang we can possibly get, and I get the multi-generational approach, and I don't want to leave out the older students, would be early childhood possibly. But whatever you decide, Alistair, literacy is, I've kind of picked out like 4 or 5 different things that I want to focus on this year and probably other years. And literacy is one of them, being from a ward where I think the startling number was like 79% of children aren't reading proficiently. That's startling, but then also hearing from parents like, well, what do you like to see people work on or do better? And they say reading is one of them. Definitely want to support your work, probably follow your lead. So those are kind of my initial reactions to what you have.
Emily and then Ruth.
Sorry, I had technical issues for a sec. Yes, thank you for this. And I guess my only comment is I do think that this is a really exciting opportunity for the state board to partner with OSSI. And, you know, I really appreciated how you highlighted very specific areas that need connecting. I love that you used connecting the dots. I'm thinking about it all the time. And one thing I'm thinking about is like, we need maybe to, well, I guess what I'm asking you is, would it make sense to advocate for a role, somebody who, you know, is a dot connector, you know, and that is what they do around this literacy plan? Is that something we should advocate OSSI consider? Because I do think, you know, it's a big issue everywhere, like with every, you know, plan, the devil is in the implementation. And I do think in DC, I've said this over and over, we are so resource rich, we have all the pieces. And I think often the missing piece is that connector, right? Somebody who's like seeing it all and understands how to pull it together. So that's one thought. I do think that we can propose to OSSI, after talking about like some of the pieces we would be able to take on most effectively, that maybe we could have just a informal conversation to start about how we might partner with them around that. And I know that in the that Representative Sutter will talk more about, how this might play out in a similar way as the Social Studies Committee did. I guess I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how you envision that, because it's pretty different. So I was just curious if you had ideas about what that might look at like, and what we might focus on if we assembled a committee like that.
So thankfully, and thank you, Representative Sutter, for housing these conversations in the Education Standards Committee for the last chunk of time. I would actually, if I may, pass that over to you, because we had this conversation in the last working session, Emily and Representative Gasoy, excuse me, and we came to sort of because I do think that what Representative Sutter has been doing was very actionable and very also collaborative, right? And would love to see us move the literacy needle forward in a similar way.
Yeah, thanks, Representative Chang. So I don't think it plays out in exactly the same way, Representative Gasoy, as social studies, in that, to your point, the end goal is different. We're not coming to a set of standards which will be crafted by a writing committee and brought to the state board for approval. But I think the cyclical collaborative way that we design the work on social studies is more to the point of what would be similar. So the idea of the board comes up with an idea on how to support work that requires both OSSE and the board to work together. In this case, whatever piece we choose to do on the literacy plan, whether it's picking up a gap that we identify, or suggesting some metrics, or whatever it is that we do. And the way I think I see it playing out similarly is state board goes to OSSE with proposal, finds the right staff members at OSSE to work with, sets up a periodic set of meetings and communications to establish a working plan, brings that back to the board, operationalizes that at the board, however it makes sense, whether that be within the Education Standards Committee with some other folks who are joining in for the literacy work, however that works, creates a work plan and builds this iteration back and forth for what the board does, what OSSE does, what the final goal is, and how staff time and member time on both ends are brought together to make the effort possible. I think I would say that the way it's different than some of the other things the board does that are connected to OSSE's work is sometimes we'll give feedback to OSSE or make recommendations, but there isn't the expectation of a collaborative approach. It's our reflection on their work or our approval of their work versus a continuous and ongoing collaborative working effort. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that sounds great, actually. Thank you.
Representative Wattenberg.
Hello. Thanks again, Representative Chang, for doing this. I just want to say, and this is to everybody, I just think we all have such a commitment on reading, and there's also a lot of knowledge on the board. So I think it's a real natural place for us to work together and make it a priority. And I like the process that's been laid out. Let me just say a few things about sort of specific things that I think that are important. Are you getting an echo from me? Hold on, let me. My backup audio is my phone. So if they're both on, I guess it echoes. Okay. Is that good now? Okay. One thing that I don't know how we play a role on this. Well, I have one idea, but that I am concerned about. There's going to be this proposal for certification for the reading specialists, which is really, really important. If we train teachers, but then there's nobody at the school to help them do it, to be coached, to help them figure out the dibbles, et cetera, it falls apart. And I don't think there's any plan that I can figure out that's going to put a reading specialist in every school. And I think that's potentially, maybe that's what we call the sort of the gap. And maybe that's something we can promote legislatively somehow, that has to be a requirement, or maybe there's a way to do it not legislatively, but I do feel like that's a huge gap. And if we don't solve it, we're going to have all this training. And once again, we're not going to see any results. So that's one thing. Another is, I thought Representative Reed raised a really good point about how students, especially in these early grades, go back and forth. And if the curriculum is always changing, that's really problematic. And of course, we don't have the ability at the state level to have curriculum across all the different LEAs. However, typically standards in reading have been way more detailed than they have been in other subjects. And I think that we should really look at those early standards. I mean, that is truly in our bailiwick to sort of see if there's a way to sort of make sure, right, or whatever, those pre-K3 literacy standards in a way that they really function almost like a curriculum across all the schools, so that wherever kids are going, it is pretty seamless. I think that would be really terrific. The third thing that I just want to raise is, and this may connect a little bit with Representative Sutter's idea of doing some reporting, is how is this going on at the school level? It gets back to the specialist idea. If all this stuff is happening up here, we really need to know, is it connecting at the school level? Are the teachers getting the help they need to teach well? Are the kids getting the help they need when they're not reading well? Are the referrals being made to the right people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? And I wonder if there might be a way to, we've done these annual reports really on teacher turnover that have really, I think, helped raise the understanding of what's going on. And I wonder if we might think about doing some sort of annual report that sort of gets at how this is beginning to take hold in the schools. So we sort of have some real understanding of that. Maybe it's quantitative, maybe it's qualitative, I don't know, but that strikes me also as something that could, maybe we do it by bringing together groups of people from individual schools, hear from them, hear what's connecting and what's not. And that, I think, is what I have to. But thank you. I think it's just a great place for us to be focusing. I think we haven't done it before, so it's a little hard to figure out exactly where and how to focus and do our work, but I think we should. So thank you.
Thank you. And I think I'd love to learn more about the how the research around teacher turnover got started and implemented, and what we can learn from that to consider something like that for literacy. So I'll follow up with you. Thank you. That's great. Representative O'Sullivan.
Thank you, Representative Chang. I just wanted to applaud you for the work you've done since you've joined this past January. This has definitely been like a steadfast thing that you've been very committed to. So I just wanted to commend you for that, and for seeing through some of the things that you were hoping to get done when you joined the board. And like Representative Johnson, definitely shocked to hear the 30% number. But I'm also encouraged, because I think what you've demonstrated us is that you're very adamant and committed on this issue. So I have full trust and confidence in you that you'll do whatever needs to be done, because I think, over my experience on the board, there definitely have been difficult, I'd say, problems we've run into with working with OSSI in the past on some of these things, and having a relationship that's collaborative and not just feeling like at times, that we are just like being used as like the token example of how OSSI may be collaborating with some agencies, and sometimes it doesn't feel like that collaboration is happening. So I think that's probably my biggest concern, but I have a lot of confidence that you'll be able to make sure that OSSI is following through on some of these things, and you'll be working with them. So I'm very confident about what you can do, and I think that this is something that will be very difficult, but if executed correctly, I think it will have a lot of benefits for our city, because as Representative O'Leary said, reading is so important, and I think that's really the goal, especially for early childhood education about literacy rates. And so I think down the road, if this is done correctly, and I'm hoping that we place an increased emphasis on the importance of this issue, we will see the benefits, and I think it'll cross over into some other parts of life here in the district as well.
Thank you all so much. And so I guess my next step then would be with your approval to take all these thoughts and responses. I've taken notes and continue working on this first from the Education Standards Committee, and then come back to all of you with some more specific proposals for what we could do as a broader board. But I do think that there will be some resource requests, right? Whether that be similar to the work that we did, the kind of a research contract style work, right? That we did with teacher turnover, or staff time around doing some policy analysis work, stakeholder engagement work, et cetera. So I really appreciate everyone's feedback, and looking forward to continuing to work with you on this over the during this 5-year plan. So thank you. President Parker.
Yeah, no, thank you. And look forward to continuing the conversation here. We are going to switch gears to committee reports, and Mr. Hayworth, if you are ready, I'm going to have us start with the Executive Director report, and then move down the list to Student Advisory Committee, the Admin Committee, so on and so forth. So,
Thank you. Can you hear me?
yes, we hear you.
Excellent. My camera is not working, and my internet is getting really spotty during the storm, so I apologize in advance. Thank you, Mr. President. I only have a couple quick updates for the board. First, I do want to relay some news about the old council chambers that I just received this afternoon, which is that the project may move forward in October, that we have funding to redo the old council chambers. Members will remember that part of the reason that we're hopeful to have that done over the summer was that we would be able to meet there in person and also have a hybrid meeting so that members of the public could participate virtually. So it's unclear exactly when that might begin, but it won't begin until probably after October 15th. And with a 2-month construction window, that means we may be able to get in there by December public meeting. So just be aware that we are still looking for other locations and trying to find places that are safe for us and for our staff, and importantly for the public to come to those meetings. That's the major update that I have, Mr. President. If there's any questions related to anything, please let me know. One other thing is members who have served on the board for a little while will probably be surprised that we're not talking about the budget for FY23 at this meeting. We are pushing that back a month. So we won't talk about FY23's budget until October, but please do get in contact with me, and I'll send out a copy of the enhancement request that we did for this last fiscal year, so everyone has an idea of what that means. But generally, enhancement requests are anything that is above what the current services level of the budget is. So anything that we're doing is sort of a basic function. Anything more than that, we have to request as an enhancement. And so every year we ask members to consider what they might think would be appropriate for us to ask for, whether that's additional research funds, which we've been successful in the past, additional staff members, new projects, those types of things. And I also want to take a quick minute to introduce to everyone our newest fellow, Giselle, who has joined us as of Monday, and she will be joining Eunice and Franco in working with the state board for this school year. So I'm really excited about her coming on board, and you know, you'll be seeing her soon in some meetings as well. So thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Next, we will have our Student Advisory Committee.
Thank you, President Parker. So I think this was a really good first meeting of September. And I just wanted to extend my invitation to the other student representatives. We've met now a couple times over Zoom, and it's great. It's been great getting to know each of them. I'm super excited about what the SAC is planning this year. We have some exciting, I'd say, things planned, ideas. And obviously our first student advisory committee meeting is going to be in a couple weeks. And we're currently looking to try to do 2 student advisory committee meetings a month. That's something we're going to talk with John Paul about. And we're going to sort of clearly lay out a structure for both, and sort of like a plan for what we're trying to accomplish in both. Because that we now have 4 student representatives, we're very much so looking to do more as a committee, and to try to plan more and to reach more students. And so a big part of that is going to be working with you all. And we at various points will reach out, because there are some events that we are trying to do in the future. And additionally, we are excited to work with the Office of the Student Advocate this coming year, specifically on something that we'll probably get into later, something that was proposed by Representative Bowie. But there are a number of things we are looking forward to doing this coming year. And I'm super excited to see Representative Johnson, Representative Bowie, and Representative Lopez continue to grow as student representatives, and to see the work that they do. I don't want to get into too many specifics about some of the things that we're trying to do, because they're not super fleshed out, but I'd be happy to talk with any of you guys. And if any of the 3 of you have anything to add on, you all can go ahead.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Can we get a list of the student advocates, of the students on the committee and the schools that they represent?
Yeah, I think we can do that. I know we have a list. I'm assuming that that's okay with John Paul, but I'm pretty sure that's something we can provide.
And is there a cap on the number of people on the committee?
No. So we're gonna have our meetings virtually this year. So we're gonna have as much space as as the Zoom permits. So we want as many students still to join the committee, even throughout the year. Something happened particularly last year is we did a lot, especially around our town hall events, to try to recruit more students to join. So when we reach out to schools, we're not just looking for people to attend our events, we're looking for prospective students who may be interested. So that's always something. I think it's a continuous effort, and you all should keep in the back of your mind. If you are at an event where you all are talking with students, it would be very beneficial for you all to bring up the student advisory committee and to tell them to email one of the student representatives or John Paul. And we are going to have a systemized approach to keeping track of all of the SAC members. And that's something that we're going to improve throughout the year as well.
Awesome. Thank you for that report. Next, we have our admin.
Representative Parker, President Parker, I think Representative Bowie has something to say.
Sorry about that. Representative Bowie, over to you.
No, I just wanted to say it's Bowie, not Bowie. Like Bowie State, Bowie, Maryland.
Bowie State. Oh, is that all you wanted to add?
Yeah, that's all I wanted to add.
Love it, love it, love it. And Representative Johnson, did you want to add something?
Yes, thank you, President Parker, and thank you, Representative O'Sullivan. I just wanted to note that we have a lot of exciting new ideas in store. And this year, for the student representatives, we really truly wanted to focus on making an impact, because as we only have a short amount of time, because me and O'Sullivan are both seniors this year, so we really want to make a difference. And one of the things that we talked about was making our meetings both engaging but impactful for the youth, and to also make sure that they're being accurately represented and having their voices heard. And so we have a lot of things in store, some really fresh ideas. And so thank you all for all of your support, and it's truly amazing to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm really excited for what you all pull off this year. Vice President Gasoy with the admin committee report.
Thank you. Hard to follow that, but so I am going to start with some small things first and then end with talking about our third try at addressing the suggestions around changing some things about our meeting structure and organization and what we do in our meetings. So just wanted to first note that at our last admin meeting, we always start with check-ins with our sister offices. And something they noted was that, the points that we have been raising based on what we're hearing from our constituents around need for virtual options and more testing is what they're hearing as well. So I just wanted to put that out there. They both noted that. And then the other thing that they noted was that both offices are going from, they were coming in person 3 days a week or 2 days a week, and they are rolling that back. So they are not feeling safe being in person in the office. So I am now going to just go over a couple of things that we discussed, which were, sorry, just finding it. Here we go. I put them in the right order and I'm looking at the wrong document. That's the problem. Okay, first thing is John, Mr. Hayworth already went over the virtual stance that we're going to keep. Was there anything else, Mr. Hayworth, that we needed to discuss around that?
No, Madam Vice President.
Okay. So the next item is committee meeting notes. So for committee chairs, something that has come up is how can we make the notes that the staff take a copious amount of time taking and then, making legible for us? How can we make them more likely to be read? And so one thing that we decided would be helpful, or we could at least try, is to have committee chairs just do pull out the high level takeaways and have bullet points at the top of those reports, those notes. So what you would do after your meeting is just send those bullet points to your staff person who's helping, and they would put out the notes with those bullets at the top. So that's just like a quick and easy thing we were thinking would be helpful for everybody. Any thoughts or questions about that? Okay, seeing none, I will go on. So,
sorry, Emily, I do have a question. So the staff is taking committee notes and we're writing committee reports, and now we're also writing bullets for the top of the notes?
Well, in a way you could think of it as the bullets can be used for your report then. I mean, it's not like you don't have to then write something different for the report. It's more that if we wanted to access those or just make the notes more accessible, the main points have been pulled out.
So, but I guess I'm misunderstanding something about what the point is, because I thought the committee reports were sort of the brief version of what's in the notes, but now we're creating an interim step. And I'm saying this as the chair of a committee who always has their meeting 24 hours before before the committee reports are due. So I'm basically getting that now there's a third step I have to build into the process, and I'm not sure how to do that.
Yeah, Mr. Hayworth or President Parker, did you want to comment what I'm trying to remember now, I think it was partly about just raising the question of whether folks actually used the notes and what would make the notes more worth the staff's time. Does that sound right?
I'm happy to weigh in. I would defer, of course, to the representatives who have their hands up first, and then I'm happy to weigh in after that.
Okay, go ahead, Representative Wattenberg. Okay, how about we'll come back to you, Representative?
No, I'm here.
Okay.
I thought the idea was that we were not going to have the long notes, that instead, because we have it's all on transcript, it's all available on video. The point was just to have the short notes. I didn't know that they were bullets as opposed to a couple of paragraphs, but I thought that was the idea.
Was just to have bullets, not the notes that the staff.
Bullets
take.
or a couple of paragraphs, but not to have, that there wasn't the need to have pages of sort of the point by point notes, because they're available, you know, if somebody wants that, they're available via Zoom, has transcripts, or you can watch it.
Right. Okay. We'll circle back on that. Thanks. Representative Thompson.
So, okay, I want to acknowledge my assumptions. My assumptions when I write my committee report, which tend to be super short, our committee report is top line, this is what happened. Notes are available if people want to read it. So like I look at people's committee reports and go, I should actually look at this longer note document or not. I don't think pulling out bullets, quite honestly, is gonna make me read a long document. I don't know if, I guess is the concern that we're wasting the staff's time, or the notes are not useful, or people are not reviewing them. I don't know how we know if people are reading the notes or not. I'm going to just acknowledge also that I tend not to refer back to notes of meetings unless I either miss the meeting or, you know, need to use it for some other purpose. But I think I'm trying to understand what problem we're trying to solve. And I'm also acknowledging assumptions I make as a representative as far as expectations for what I should share out, like what level of detail I should share out and what other documents are available.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I guess I would say the notes that the staff take are for transparency purposes. So we, I think, have decided to continue that more for the public to have access to the actual, you know, conversation more in depth. And then having the bullet points at the top was more just for sort of like the executive summary, but shorter. But, you know, point taken, Representative Sutter, you know, we do have the reports. So to be quite frank, that's why I'm calling on Mr. Hayworth. I am not recalling the conversation completely, I think, or who raised it as something that should be addressed.
Thanks, Dr. Sway. I think there were a couple concerns, and Representative Wattenberg is putting some of the concerns in the chat and mentioned them too, that there was a desire and knowledge that the transcripts are available via the YouTube. And I think to Dr. Sutter's point, I think it makes a lot of sense that, you know, maybe what we are looking for is for the reports to be the you know, sort of high level bullets that committee chairs take from the notes. And if so, I think that's great. And maybe that's one of the things that we can do. I mean, you know, it's an unfortunate aspect of the calendar that some committees meet right before the sort of reports are due to us. And I think if we can make that easier for members to just take the notes and just do a couple bullets as their report for working session, I think that would be helpful. I think that could work and solve both problems with sort of one swoop. Does that make sense?
I'll just chime in and say that's what I've been doing. And it's super helpful to me as committee chair to be able to take the staff notes and pull out that which I think is relevant for the committee report, meaning like, what are the high level hits? What are the things the whole board needs? And what should they attend to without some of the back and forth dialogue that is present in the notes? I do really like that back and forth dialogue being captured in the notes though, because I think it's helpful to understand the process by which decisions are reached.
Right. And I think for some folks, there is a video to Representative Wattenberg's point, but the transcript for the video is not reliable or accurate. entirely. And I think there was a decision that it was important to have the written record as well for transparency. Representative Thompson, do you have your hand up again, or is it from last time?
I don't think I do, but I would agree that it is important to have the written record. And it sounds like that, just to reiterate, it sounds like the expectation is notes come out, we use the notes to put some bullet points in our committee report, problem solved. Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
It. You're welcome. Sorry if I wasn't clear. But I think that that is what I was trying to convey. Yes. All right, going on, if there's no other questions or comments, don't hate me. Okay, external advisory boards. So many of us serve on other advisory boards or working groups. And in the past, we have had sort of a similar go around that we're doing now with the committee reports, where we just sort of check in on, are there any updates? Have you met on your external board? And just giving 3-minute review or summary. So would like to bring that back. And in the report, my committee report, you can see all the breakdown of who's on what board. One thing I will just note is some of us have joined boards since we voted on those, and they need to be voted on. Those appointments need to be voted on. And so Mr. Hayworth is going to write a resolution for that, and we will vote on those in October. Not October, sorry, at our next meeting, our next public meeting in September. So I don't think there's much more to say about that, except you don't need to do a report, but just, do a verbal readout at the meeting, and we will call each of the external boards and just ask if you have a summary. Any questions or thoughts about that?
Dr. Casoy, if I can clarify just one point. This is not all boards that members are serving on. It is only boards in which you are serving because of your role as a state board rep.
Oh, thank you. Yes.
So if you are serving on a board that you are serving because of you personally, then we don't need a report for that. It's only the boards that you are serving on because you are the SBOE member. And if you have questions about the specifics, just let me know. Send me an email, and we can figure out whether or not one is applicable or not.
Right. So it's in the admin report, which of those boards would be relevant here. Okay, now onto the discussion of our meeting structure. So I'm actually going to drop in the chat the issues that were identified that we should address. So those are the issues I think we have discussed in 2 previous meetings. And so I just want to go over them one at a time. The first one is one that Representative Reed raised, which is a need for more continuity between our working meetings and our public meetings. And I think there's some overlap between that and the need for more time for discussion, but they're not the same. And that's something that we kind of figured out and pulled, apart, parsed out. So one suggestion we have for addressing this issue was just the need for more intentionality. It's sort of a, no-brainer here that to be more intentional, but how to do it, right, is the question. And we do have this tool that we've talked about before, but it's been hard to get it in use. So I just dropped a link to our planning document, our public meeting planning document in the chat. And one thought is that, I've been sending out these Monday to-do lists, and I could add this to the Monday to-do list and just remind you that this is there so that we can see, what are the issues that are coming up in your wards and that you think we should focus on through a panel. And then that would help the leadership team to propose panels that and guests that we would have at our working session that would be more cohesive. It doesn't mean we would do that every time, because sometimes, there might be, a pressing issue that comes up too close to a meeting, or we just feel like there's a guest that would be really helpful for something that's not related to the public meeting panel, but this is just one suggestion for dealing with that. So thoughts or questions about that? Does it sound reasonable to try this?
I'm sorry for being less than the star student here again. I want to make sure I'm tracking.
Yeah.
So
appreciate that.
Are talking about, does it make sense? Okay. We're revisiting the expectation that if board members have topics, they're adding them to this document. And I think you are asking us if it is helpful if you add that to the weekly list, 1. 2, if that addresses this dual need for intentionality regarding planning and continuity between meetings. Or are you suggesting that we'll discuss those separately?
I think so. Just to clarify, the issues to address at the top, or the first chat I put in there, the need for more continuity between working meetings is the issue. And then the second number one I chatted out, the more intentionality is sort of the proposed resolution. So how can we be more intentional? And my suggestion is that we do this with backward design. I mean, to your question, actually, in another forum where you said, what was our goal or our expectation for this conversation that we just had? Maybe there should have been more backward planning there, meaning
Paul, that was my question. And I mean, I'm not, yes. So so with Deputy Mayor Khan, I think my question, which no one got to witness outside of us, was what was the expectation set for the guests as far as engagement with this body, which is different, I think, than the things on this list. So when I think about what our new student representative voiced in response to the deputy mayor's, kind of just tone and tenor, that actually speaks to my question of what expectation did we set as far as engagement with this body? That's one thing. That's actually very different than things like continuity between topics, or if we're intentional in planning. Like when I think about intentionality for planning, so it might have made sense to invite the DME to talk about reopening, because at the end of the day, it is somewhere between the DME and the mayor who has the most authority around school reopenings, and that's what we're living right now. So that I would see that decision as intentional to focus on that. I think it's different as far as the quality of engagement we have once that person arrives, which is not on this list. So I'm trying to make sure I understand, and noting everything can't be perfect, and everything's not in our control, but for the things what in this conversation, what are we trying to solve for? Because there's a lot here.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it is it's just the continuity question, and thank you for clarifying sort of the difference in those examples that I gave. I mean, I appreciate that. But I guess my question here is it enough to just try to really use this tool as a way to create more continuity, because I'm not sure how else to do it. If we don't know like what members are hearing, and what therefore we should have as a panel, it's hard to plan that, and we need to know it in advance, obviously. So this is just the admin committee's proposal for addressing that issue. Representative O'Leary.
When you talk about continuity, Alistair brought up about it would be nice to have a debrief of the deputy mayor's visit with us, and that's not in the plan. I think we need to have, especially for if we have an invited guest at our business meetings, where we do have a chance to question them about things. I think it would be very valuable for us to have some time, and I don't know, just to have flexibility to be able to have a debrief of something like that. Because I judging from what I read on the chat and on emails and things like that, that there weren't a lot of people satisfied with what happened. And what is our role? Is our role that as advocates for our community and for our children and the families and the schools? And I'm almost totally convinced that that's what our role is, and that we're all ready to roll with that. And but I think that might be something we could think about. I mean, because this is really the only time where we have officials come and present. They don't do it at the. I mean, even when the state superintendent presents at the public meeting, there isn't any place for us to question what she says, or he, depending on who the superintendent is. And I think there should be. I just have that to say.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think it's related to Representative Thompson.
So these are delayed thoughts, and I'm sleepy because, like everybody else, my dog woke me up at 3-something this morning because, hurricanes or tropical depressions or whatnot. I don't feel difficulty being able to recommend things. I don't see that as a challenge. I remember this document. I don't think I've put anything in there recently, but if there's something I feel strongly about, I do feel that there are ways for me to communicate with the rest of the body and that they are heard. I don't, so I just want to acknowledge that is maybe not a huge problem to solve for. I think that as I reflect on our most recent meetings, given we just had a meeting that was entirely public comment, we then issued a letter which was reflective of that public comment, and then we invited the deputy mayor, whether that was a satisfying experience or not. We invited the deputy mayor and did receive a response, timely or not, to that recommendation. I think that is a good example of continuity and how you use meetings, the different types of meetings effectively. So maybe that is some place that we are improving. I saw that Representative Reed in the chat asked if there was a way to defer to the leadership team in regards to a strategy for this. I think, and maybe and maybe we are not at all going to figure this out here this evening, but I think I would like to better understand what the standard is, or like what the expectation is for, like, what does this look like done well, before I start to propose things to say we should do X, Y, and Z. And I think some of that maybe can be hashed out via email or something, but I will acknowledge that this most recent series of meetings, that would be a good example of continuity, in my opinion. So yeah, that's my 2 cents in feedback. I have nothing else on this topic for the rest of the evening.
Thank you. Can I actually just clarify though, when you said you would like to see a good or an example of what this looks like done well, are you saying this was an example, or you're saying?
I think in my opinion, that's an improvement for us. I see the thread there, but before I start to make suggestions around how we can do something better, I think I want to have a shared expectation for like where we want to get to, like what good looks like.
Okay, thank you. And I do see President Parker's note that we should move on, and there's 2 other sort of substantive changes proposed. So I'll take these 2 comments and then try to quickly just at least present those, and maybe we can then table the conversation. So go ahead, Representative O'Sullivan.
Yeah, I'll keep this short. The only thing I was going to say is I think from my experience, sort of looking back, I don't think we get a lot of opportunities or to discuss what we just heard or what we just experienced. And I think that's something that may be really good for us. And I don't know how that fits in to the continuity discussion, but I think I definitely agree with Trevor. Representative brought up the point that it would be nice for us to talk about what happened earlier in the meeting, only because I think it would be good for us to have that discourse, because I know there are certain things we can't do offline or can't discuss in a meeting that isn't a public meeting or that isn't live streamed. So I think it would be nice for us to maybe in the future reserve some time to discuss some of these things so we can hear people's thoughts. And so I think some of us especially may reserve some of our thoughts on things only because we want to be considerate of people's time and not try to, take up all 3 minutes. And I think a lot of us have a lot of emotions and maybe some solutions that we can't get to it in 180 seconds.
Thank you for that. Yeah, that's a great push. Representative Sutter.
Yep. The only thing I would like to add is I think it was helpful. The tracker is great. I think it's helpful if we have some shared agreement of a proposed set of topics for the months ahead so that we can discuss them. Because I know I have felt I put things in the tracker, but I don't know if the admin committee has decided those are worthwhile ideas that will be accepted or not right for the time. So getting some feedback from the admin committee on ideas placed in the tracker is the one thing I would like to add as a suggestion.
Say the last thing again. I'm sorry, I was looking at having something from the admin committee.
Getting feedback from the admin committee on things that have been placed in the tracker. So as a member, I can put things in the tracker, but I don't know if they have been accepted or not as topics for discussion. So if the admin committee could periodically update members on our proposed topics for the September, October, November meetings are ABC, that would be great. Because right now I feel like it kind of goes into the tracker and goes into the ether, and I don't, as someone who is not a member of the admin committee, I don't have insight into it. And it doesn't always come out on the report, right? Like the admin committee report has lots of good information, but for instance, this month's report doesn't tell us what we're talking about at the September public meeting.
Right. Okay. Thank you. So President Parker, are you suggesting we table the rest of this conversation period? Okay, that's fine. And I'll just raise it in an email. We can kind of have email conversation, I guess, or something. We'll figure it out.
Thank you. Next is the Assessment and Accountability Committee. Representative Patterson, I'm going to turn it to you since I don't see Representative Weidenberg.
Oh, I'm here.
She is here, and I'm going to let her take the lead because I've been out a little bit due to what happened at KIP DC in the last couple of weeks. So she's been doing an outstanding job during my time out. So take it away, Representative.
Well, thank you, Representative. So I want to, I'm really going to do two things. I want to report on just sort of the status of some of the work that the committee has been doing and the staff has been producing to sort of make it possible for all of us to know more and engage our folks more about the star rating, and also where we are in terms of the timeline. So let me start by just saying the status of things so people know. First of all, the whole idea of interviewing principals is an opportunity for individual board members to get real one-on-one conversation with principals about what is the effect of the star rating. Wonderful, terrible, somewhere in the middle, how could it be improved, et cetera, et cetera. And I think about half of the board has completed these and half is still working on it. So I just want to acknowledge it was a busy summer, and I can't understate or overstate how busy the fall was. So totally understood. They are, I think everybody who's been, or most people who have been on them, you really learn a lot. So I encourage people to do them. And I think at the October working meeting, we are going to try to have a roundtable where we can also to share what we learned from the different principals to help us all think about this star rating. Second, principal survey. And that is, just sent out to the principals. That was completed. It was sent out to all principals, I think in mid-July. And we've got, I believe, about a quarter of the principals have turned it in roughly, although everyone hasn't, or even more than that, but everybody hasn't completely finished it. We are going to take one more week to try to do a final opportunity for everybody to just email their own principals. You should be getting a copy of the email that the board sent to principals recently. So I really urge people to send it out to the principals in your ward. Hopefully people have a list of them. It's not that hard to do, and really encourage them to participate because they know stuff about the rating and its effect that nobody else knows. And that's why we're doing the interviews, but we also want something broader than that. Third, teacher survey has been completed. It's sort of all locked up. Everybody's looked at it. We are holding it up for a short moment, maybe a couple of weeks while we go through this back to school period. And then that will go out. When that goes out, we're just going to encourage everybody to sort of get it out with social media, get it out in your newsletter so the teachers know that it's out there. In addition, we have commitments from a number of organizations to send it out to their members and to the people that they work with who are teachers. We've just about completed, I would say, this sort of a PowerPoint that members can use to bring out to their communities. That should go out. I think if it doesn't go out by the end of this week, which I think it probably will, it'll go out at the beginning of next week, and it'll have some notes about it. It's a set of slides that I hope everyone will find useful. It's more comprehensive maybe than any one of us would put together, because we're trying to reflect the needs of a number of different folks and wards and views and so on. So when you get them, you may well want to make your own sort of editing choices as you go through it, but we do have a set of activities, sort of interactive activities that Darren in particular has put a lot of effort into trying to create a way that we could have real interaction, really hear people think about what they want and need in this virtual world. So you'll get that. And then at a relevant point, probably later this month, we'll have a parent survey to go out. That said, let me just say something about the timeline. We had originally talked about having an October vote and making September sort of a time of intense reaching out and engagement. And I know a lot of people have been reaching out in some form or another, over the summer now. But we wanted to do it in September because there is a timeline, which I'll talk about in a moment, but we also knew that we might get here and there'd just be too much in the fall and in September, and we wanted to be in a position to be able to delay it. And I think we all have the view that we need to delay it at least until October. So that is the plan right now. So the principal surveys are out. We're going to hold other things back for now. and move towards a vote at our November public meeting, not the October public meeting. So think about all that. And then what I want to say is on this timeline, the relevant thing is I think that everybody or almost everybody would prefer to have us have a set of recommendations made to OSSI, with OSSI having a chance to re-engage on this whole issue before there's a new rating put out, a new rating put out. We know there's not going to be one next December, in December 2021. I think we think it's unlikely that there would be one in December 2022, because we won't have enough test scores and so on, but pending conversations between our leadership and OSSI, we don't know that, and that could also liberalize our timeline a little bit also. So that's all. I'll throw it to Jacques if he wants to add anything. But for now, it's a vote in November. All this material is coming at you. I encourage you to do those principal interviews and to make sure you get this out to your principals.
No, I think you summed it up well. Thank you, Representative Wattenberg. But we do want to emphasize, looking at how this year has started for everyone in your respective wards, and all the things that our parents, our teachers, our principals, school leaders are going through at this particular time, regardless of which LEA they're at or what sector they're in. We want to be considerate of that. So that's why we did push that back. But we are encouraging everyone, when you do have the opportunity to engage those individuals, to do so, because we want to make this as equitable as possible, especially when we're talking about areas that normally don't participate as much as we would like them to. So I know there's going to have to be some pushes there. So we're giving this time to make sure that we do get very substantive feedback on all of these surveys and questionnaires that we have and send out. So please make that a priority for you now that we have some more time to allow people to get through some of the beginning school activities and hurdles. Just really want to emphasize that standpoint. I think Darren has worked very hard to make sure that this is a very good, the questionnaires and everything that's gone into them, the presentations. Truly appreciate the committee members for weighing in and making them as quality as they are. So please just want to push that forward. So thank you.
Thank you. Members, if there are questions or comments, let's utilize the chat, just looking at the clock. And we're going to go to the Board Governance Committee, Representative Thompson.
Sure. Board governance. So our committee last met on August 4th. We had our culminating presentation from our AU fellows on their summary findings. I think we sent that around to all members. If we did not send that around to all members, I will send that around to all members. I know it went to all committee members, but that includes essentially a crosswalk that they developed of responsibilities and authorities of state and local district boards compared to our authority as the DC State Board of Education. Our next meeting, we will actually be following up and have a presentation from the gentleman from Mathematica and some of his partners who came. So if people are interested in joining that, you're welcome to join it. Also, thank you to Representative Sutter for making those grad students available to us. We appreciate their time and energy and patience with us. And so I don't know if I'm happy to answer any questions or not in the interest of time, but I'm happy to make all those things available.
Any questions? We have 3 minutes.
I raised my hand, my actual hand. I couldn't find it. Too much going on down there today. So wait, so you said the Mathematica rep, you all had that individual come to a meeting for the no.
He will come. This is a letting you all know.
Okay.
That if you are interested, you're welcome to join our committee meeting and learn more about that presentation. Mm-hmm.
Got it. Follow-up question. Do we know who paid for that study? That could be a question I can come and ask.
That can be something I can find out. I'll let you know.
Okay, great.
I know who didn't pay for it. Any other questions? Okay, awesome. Be brief, be gone.
Awesome. Education Standards Committee report is up next.
Thanks, President Parker. You heard at least one good segment of our report from Representative Chang when we talked about literacy, so I'll skip that. Two other pieces of the report: homeschooling. We debriefed our panel and talked about elements of what we learned in that panel that we want to make sure to keep our eye on this year, including homeschool enrollment and opportunities to follow up with OSSI to make sure that the feedback we got from families and advocates on the call about homeschooling families being involved in portfolio review and resources around special education, better understanding that situation and policy decision by OSSI are things that we will follow up on. So we talked about that. We talked about the ethnic studies panel that we've come to you all about a couple of times. That is tentatively scheduled for September 7th. Representative Chang is working with panelists, and we're working to invite folks from the CSAC and Technical Writing Committee. Representative Chang, I'll follow up with you to make sure we're all set for that event. We'll certainly let members of the board know about that timing. The big chunk of our discussion, besides the literacy plan, was really about social studies standards. And I sent you all an email yesterday, and I wanted to use most of our time to talk about that and take questions. So the OSSI Technical Writing Committee has completed their first draft of the standards. And I am so excited because now it feels very real that we have a draft. You all have that draft in your inbox as a PDF. You also have a set of slides that were prepared by OSSI's Technical Writing Committee consultant, AIR, as well as a link to a Zoom video recording that walks you through the process of writing the standards, what is in the current draft, and what the writing committee could use review support on. There is also in that email I sent a link to a survey where you can provide all your feedback on these draft standards so that the writing committee has it and can use it to inform the next draft of the standards. Three really important things to know about this review. One, it is a deliberative process review. It is not a public review at this point. And for that reason, these standards are not to be shared with anyone outside the board or the Social Studies Standards Advisory Committee. So these are available to the entire board, student representatives too, and you are welcomed and invited and in fact deeply encouraged to provide your feedback on the standards at this time using the survey form. But please do not share it more widely because this is not yet a draft for public comment. That public comment period will happen in November, December, once we've given feedback and the writing committee incorporates it into the draft that will be for the public. Second thing, we have until September 15th to provide that feedback. So it's about 2 weeks for you all to take time to read the standards, take time to read the survey, take time to watch that video, and go ahead and provide your feedback. You're asked to do two things in providing the feedback. One is to provide feedback overall on how the standards align with the guiding principles our board voted to adopt, and they mean that for the standards as a whole. So do take time to at least skim the entire standards document. But then there are sections of the survey where you can respond to any of the specific grade level bands of the standards. So if you want to read the whole standards document in detail and provide feedback on all of it, go for it. If you want to provide feedback on one particular segment, so students, if you want to give us middle and high school feedback, folks on the board, if you have a particular grade band of interest to you that you want to hone in on, you may provide feedback on any or all of the sections of the grades. The more the better, but be realistic about your time, because again, September 15th is the deadline. And the third thing is, as you're providing this feedback, be specific. Answer the questions in as much detail as possible, because this will inform the public draft that we are able to send out and broadly engage all of our constituents and stakeholders on later this year. So the more feedback we give now, the better draft we'll have to present to the public later this fall. So those are the high points from our report. I'd like to use the rest of the time for any questions board members may have about anything in the committee report or specifically how to respond to the standards. Okay, apparently my description was awesome.
Representative Sutter, I do have one like super technical question. Will there
Sure.
be a readout or an opportunity to see questions posed by other board members? Given that I would only know the questions or the points of feedback that I'm providing?
Oh, that's a great question. So not while you are providing feedback, no, there's no chance for a readout on that. However, once we do have all of the feedback, we are happy to share back the feedback that we got. But no, during the process, there won't be that chance. That said, if you all do have questions or concerns, for instance, you read through the standards and you say, you know, one of our guiding principles was expand the representation of underrepresented groups in the standards. And I'm reading this and I have some real questions as to whether or not that has been accomplished. Feel free to start an email thread for all of us, knowing that our email threads are public and folks could request them, but we could then have that discussion as a group internally as you're filling out your survey. Certainly feel free to address that to me and I'm happy to respond and help moderate that.
No, that's really helpful. And then a second quick follow-up question. The reason I'm asking for the readout is because I think when we get the revised draft of the standards, it will be helpful to know or have a full account of board feedback. So thank you. That's great that we're going to get that. Let's say hypothetically, we are not pleased with the revised draft. Is there an opportunity to send it back or will it still go to public comment regardless?
Sure. Thanks, Representative Lopez. We'll miss you. So the plan for this is to continue to have this process be iterative. So this is the internal deliberative process feedback. The state board will, and I should be real specific, Alex Jew will be back from his parental leave, and he and I will take a look at all the feedback that has come back. We'll give it to the folks at AAR and the writing committee for them to incorporate it into the next draft. The current timeline does not envision this, but I think if there were major pieces of feedback and concerns, we could certainly go to OSSI and say, we may need another round of internal feedback before we go to public comment. My hope is that we don't, but I certainly think that is feasible. Once the draft goes out for public comment, right now it's envisioned that there's almost a 2-month public comment period that draft will be out. We'll be able to engage constituents. So I'll put in the tracker a request, for instance, to have folks come to our November public meeting to be able to testify about the standards so that they can share information and reflections on the public comment draft that's out there. Then OSSI will take that back. John Paul has educated all of us on the committee about the fact that any substantive feedback that OSSI receives that it needs to make adjustments to has to go back out for another round of public feedback. So we've got plenty of wiggle room built in to make sure that these standards that ultimately are voted on by the board are ones that we feel strongly about, that we will defend, that we think are the right things for the students of the District of Columbia. Rep. Reed, you had a question.
As you started explaining more, that was helpful because I was going to say, kind of as a new member, just kind of in social studies not being my area of expertise, even though I like a lot of the content, just the guidance around just what kind of lens, how do you want us to look at it, process it. So it was helpful to say like, refer back to guiding principles and then look at the standards and then be very specific is kind of what with some guidance for like how to review those standards and be helpful in that review. So
yeah, I also think that video that AAR created is super helpful. So take a look at the deck, which is a PDF in the email, but also take a look at the Zoom itself because she really does walk you through the way in which reviewing the standards would be helpful. All right, we got 36 seconds to give you back. President Parker.
Awesome. Thank you. Next up, we have outreach and advocacy.
Okay, so outreach and advocacy, and I lost the notes. Hold on 1 second. Sent to Malaya. There we go. Ta-da. All right, here we are. All right, so we met on Friday, August 20th, and we actually started with a reflection on just the unfortunate spree of violence in our city. And from that, it wasn't even something really for our agenda, but from something that emerged from that was possibly, a focus on like, not really focus, but, considering like social emotional learning, school culture, just topics around, how are we getting students kind of re-engaged in learning. We also were just thinking about like, what are some other topics that kind of, I think, prior to our last public meeting, and then things that we were kind of encountering that we can possibly be bringing and we're inviting in around for topics is like, or I guess it's like almost an advocacy agenda, where topics of like safe passage, staying on top of like where the recovery funds are going, how they're being used. If another wave of recovery funds were to somehow trickle down, how do we get ahead of that, or make sure the funds are actually going towards meaningful categories, and then building maintenance. So hopefully in the next few meetings, we'll kind of revisit those topics, as well as we'll continue to analyze our public comment. But I think with kind of just what's happening, building maintenance possibly might be our upcoming meeting. If I can, I know Robert White's office has been really responsive about maintenance issues. But thinking about like, how can we invite maybe his office and DGS in, just to get an understanding of like, what is the process of a work order? I don't think we actually know that, or what happens when, why do certain work orders come up, get responded to immediately? Why do some get pushed back? Just the process of what is happening whenever a school issues a maintenance request, and seeing, what kind of solutions we can come up with that, or just a better understanding of what happens with how our buildings, at least the DC public school buildings, are handled, since I think a lot of us have been bombarded with building maintenance issues. As I toggle through. Oh, so that was kind of our meeting. Something else that has emerged within the last week, President Parker reached out and was thinking about like, how can we kind of keep our foot on the gas and really engaged around school reopening, so that, we can really get a sense of what's happening around reopening. And I kind of responded to him like, and especially in light of like the response today from the DME, like, it just feels like there's really not a lot that can be done. Like, people are saying, I want XYZ, or I need XYZ. And it's kind of like, So we were thinking of creating like a Google Doc form, and I'll share it with you. I completely forgot to share it before coming on this meeting, where people can basically enter their information. It could be confidential, or they can identify themselves and just say like, what was something that they encountered, or what was an idea they had around reopening. And then basically, do they want to talk to a State Board of Education representative, demographic information, just an outlet for individuals to kind of share what their experiences are in buildings at the moment, so that we can consolidate it and then give like a hopefully maybe a true reflection or a better reflection of things that people are encountering, things that may not be matching what certain protocols are saying are in place, so that we can kind of like target those issues. I chose this format instead of like just having a meeting, because I think it's just kind of ongoing. You can't deny possibly like a Google form of, 3 or 4 requests for surprise, a virtual option, or, maintenance issues or something like that. So we'll share that form with you, or if somebody has a link to it, they can probably do it. But I'm not sure that's really the end of my report. Our next meeting is September, the 3rd Friday in September. I'm going to try to work on getting like DGS or Robert White's office contact, who's been really responsive around maintenance issues to kind of come and walk us through that process. So you're welcome to participate.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And one thing I would just say, Representative Reed's vision is that, and it would, the trends identified in that form would be what her committee would take action on, and engaging members of the council, but also the public around in order to get solutions. And so thanks for your leadership on that, Representative. Next, we have the Teacher Practice Committee. You're muted.
Somebody keeps muting me. This won't be too long, but I also want to add to just to encourage everyone to talk to the people in the community, especially the people that work in buildings that aren't being serviced by DGS, to sign up to testify at our next public meeting, so that it can get out there into the public. The Teacher Practice Committee did not meet in August due to the recess. The last action item that the committee worked on was the Mary Levy report, which was adopted by the board at the July public meeting. Looking ahead, the committee will be working on launching the Teacher Advisory Committee and developing overall recommendations based on the state board's cumulative body of teacher retention research. And also, we're going to be looking on trying to prod the LEAs in the city to let us know what happened with their teachers at the beginning of this year and at the end of last year. I mean, all of the LEAs right now know how many teachers they have in the building and how many teachers left the buildings. But we want to try to get more information about that so we can get a true read on teacher retention, even though last year was a unique year in education. That's it. Questions? I don't need it. You don't have to ask any questions. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Representative. I'm going to take the lack of questions as the hour is drawing on. And next on our agenda is new business. And also wanted to just circle back on the discussion we had earlier today with the Deputy Mayor, and opening up the floor for discussion, both in response to what we heard, but any proposed next steps, keeping in mind we will not be able to take a vote tonight, but we can at least put things on the table. And I'm going to say, let's keep this to no more than 15 minutes. Mr. Hayworth, if you could set the timer. And I'm going to recommend we just have an open floor discussion.
Question. Are you saying keep new business to 15 minutes or keep this discussion about what just transpired to 15
Keep
minutes?
this discussion to 15 minutes. And then we would also have new business where people would put stuff on the table. And we certainly don't have to use 15 minutes, but in case the conversation.
No, I just want, you answered it.
Yep. Any thoughts in reaction to what we heard? And again, we're gonna just keep it open floor. So no need to raise your hand.
I lowered my hand. So I do want, now that I kind of have my life together, because I really was pissed off about that letter coming at 4:47 p.m., less than 15 minutes from the start of our meeting, when ultimately we were making asks for things that we've been repeating for a long time. And I'll also say, and I didn't get a chance to enter, and I also went and celebrated the families who took the choice to have their students return on Monday. But in going to that, going to the back to school celebrations and clap-ins, I also was fielding calls, at least 2 that day, from families who were circling back, or I think maybe one the first time reaching out, on wanting a virtual option. And I think folks who are asking for an option, they have to opt in. So I think we're making the city pay, making people pay for maybe the actions of when we had the posture of we actually had to be virtual. People weren't trained on it. They just had to go, devices were sent home and that was it. But I think parents are, and I'm talking like honor roll students, not that it matters, but like honor roll students, a parent of a PTO who they basically made her lose her seat. Like they kicked the kids out of school because she was like, I'm not sending them because our numbers are high. So I think those are like some of the stories that I guess all that to say, I don't feel like we should let up on asking for a virtual option. Today, I had the honor of going to second grade with a family member who is in PG County Public Schools. And I was just impressed by the rollout of their virtual option. And I will say parents are not asking for it to be perfect either. I think they understand these folks are calling like what some of the quote risks are. But I'm all over the place. But yeah, so yeah, like the way PG County rolled it out, they put a wait list for 12,000. Only 9,000 families took the option, which leaves room to grow if they need to. Yes, it's hubs from school, so no, the student would not be necessarily assigned to their neighborhood school. Yes, they are getting like the school I went to go visit, realized today that they just got pulled into the virtual option hub last minute. But I think it's something worth not letting go of, that just having that option for families, and just even taking a temperature check of how many families actually want it. But I think just saying like, heels in the ground, no, we're not going to go or do that it does a disservice to families. And what I will end up, especially on my end, is, well, then Ward 8 families aren't engaged. We have the worst attendance, this and this and this. And it's like, no, we're asking to be engaged, and people aren't listening to what the request is. So I'm sorry, I yield, but I feel like I just needed to explain where the 2 years came from, and what people are doing, like what's happening, and that we could just do a better job of just listening to folks. Yeah, I'll stop.
They'd do a better job if they were ready to do a better job. That's the problem, is we need to keep up the pressure. The same reason why we want the people to come and testify about how their buildings are run down. We need to have those people testify about wanting to educate their children at home because they don't think it's safe in the schools and everything. We need to keep the pedal to the metal. They have to be accountable because a lot of them don't want to be accountable.
Oh, I know some people have their hands up and some people don't.
I'm sorry.
No, you don't have to apologize, because what we were told was we could just jump in, but then I saw that the students defaulted to their hands. Maybe we should just keep the hands going. And that way nobody feels like they get cut off. No, because it's hard with Zoom. And so I'm just going to vote for hands, because that. I didn't want you all sitting there waiting.
Go,
Alex.
Interactive.
Okay, well, I was just gonna say, I think it's just a habit from school, just raising your hand. So it's totally all right. The only thing I wanted to say is I feel so that Student Advisory Committee published a report in 2020, which was, I guess, June 2020. So last year, the beginning of the pandemic, listing some recommendations about in-person learning if it were to happen. Obviously, we know in-person learning didn't really happen last year. There were a number of suggestions we had more than, I guess, more like probably 14 months ago or something like that about these things. And we were clear from that time. And I remember vividly in one of the meetings we had with Deputy Mayor Kine, I specifically asked him if he had read that report. And I told him to read that report. Because the truth is, the recommendations for these things have been quite clear. Like, it's not like things have been changing as the pandemic has changed. Like, even with the Delta variant, a lot of the things that we are calling on people to do have largely remained the same. So the frustration for me stems from this place where I feel that in all of the time that we have spent in these meetings, hearing complaints from parents, hearing stories about families who are concerned, it feels like the people who are actually doing things about it are not doing anything. And it's frustrating because here we are saying the exact same things. And then as Representative Bowie pointed out, it feels like the responses we're getting are not real responses whatsoever. And that's so frustrating for me. And another thing I'll say that I'm concerned about, particularly with Deputy Mayor Kynes, I'd say his commitment to following the CDC religiously. I'm slightly concerned about that because some of the CDC's recommendations are not fully up to date regarding the Delta variant. Like, I know he said something about you need 15 minutes of time in a room with someone to be to get the virus, and that's not true anymore with the Delta variant. I think we've probably all read some studies that have proven that with this variant, it requires much less time. I'm very concerned about how the contact tracing program is going to work, because if students are being tested and if they test positive and families are not being told which students are testing positive, and we are relying on principals who are relying on guidelines which are outdated, in that case, we are all going to be relying on outdated science. So we are not going to prevent an outbreak. I think what will inevitably happen if something isn't done about this is that at some point or another, you know, at a school, we will see extremely high rates of COVID-19. And then at that point, you know, everything we've done, everything that we've been working towards pretty much goes to shambles. So I'm very concerned. And I think it's something we need to really look at, is how we're operating the contact tracing program, because I don't feel comfortable with my principal leading the program following some of the science that Deputy Mayor Kynes just stated, where he's still relying on data that says you need 15 minutes when you don't need 15 minutes. And we are in a close building in my school, 700 kids, a whole grade level of whom are not even allowed to be vaccinated yet. Like, this is a real legitimate concern. And I think anyone who follows this information knows that it's something we need to pay close attention to.
Representative Johnson, feel free to jump in.
Ultimately, I'm also disappointed within the lack of response. We're in the midst of this pandemic and we're facing harsh and ugly realities. And I feel like there's also a point to note that additionally, in my school, we're cramped in the hallways. Masking issues are also present. And in addition, I'm also in a classroom with 30 other students. There's 30 of us. And in direct quotes of what my teacher said earlier, this can't be safe, in his exact words. And so there's a problem here. And when I looked at this letter earlier, I was so disappointed because in direct quotes, it says, the exuberance, joy, and wellness of our school communities have been on full display as public schools across the district have fully reopened with comprehensive safety protocols and strong enrollment and attendance. I just want to know, where are they getting these words from? Because the peers that I know aren't really excited. Families are concerned, and I just want to know how many voices and how many stories do we have to hear before they actually take our voices into consideration and actually listen to us? And that's the point that I wanted to make earlier. I feel like I don't want to say ridiculous, but it is ridiculous. Thank you.
You know, I think a lot of people agree with you. Representative Thompson.
Yeah, so I have a few thoughts. I think first, I truly appreciate our student representatives for so many reasons. And so thank you all for everything you contributed today. It is not lost on me that they absolutely understand that it is both possible to celebrate back to school. I know I saw some parents who were thrilled to like drop some kids off and pull off really quickly on Monday. Let's not be mistaken. And I have also calls, emails, DMs, everything, sent pigeons from people, received pigeons from people about how much anxiety and fear they have. I do think there are some things that are absolutely reasonable that can be and should be put into place for students who are in person. And I actually don't think we're doing all that we can, period. I'm disappointed to see that we're not doing temperature checks anymore. That doesn't make any sense, because we have a person dedicated at buildings to do the screening, and they look at you just like they looked at me on Monday and asked me some questions, and I told the truth and they were the right answers, but we already bought all the temperature guns. So why would we not use them? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Or this question of like, what is considered a classroom and where students actually are in buildings, given social distancing. Like, there are some things we literally should just be honest about when we recognize that not all of our guidelines are perfect. We can do better. I don't think we know enough across LEAs around just a standard for things. I know that I saw at Stokes, like, they're 100% of those teachers are vaccinated. Like they're doing more testing, and they want some of the parents want some efficiency around just students being able to get in the building. Like, there are things that come with that, but I worry about there being not a strong enough standard for in-person safety, period. I also think that empathy and equity are actually important in practice. And I don't know if I have the words to say all the places I see that lacking when it comes to people just expecting responsiveness from the city that we collectively live in. I don't think that's too much to ask. I don't know what else to say about that. I mean,
no.
You gotta do this now? Dogs. So yeah, I mean, I don't know what else to say about that. Last thing I'll say about the in-person, I mean, the virtual piece. A lot of our kids have asthma. For generational reasons, as far as living close to highways and, all the things that come when you live in an impoverished community, that is actually not a reason to opt out medically. And so when I hear us talk about like equity and think about the access to doctors and medical providers, I feel more than a disconnect between what we're offering families. And so I'm struggling with like understanding some of these things. I'm not an anxious person. I do feel a bunch of collective anxiety. I feel rather insufficient as far as what I'm able to provide as a representative, as a reasonable response. And I'm also kind of just pulling my hair out as far as how do we reflect what families are showing us, because I feel like a lot of it has been dismissed for a variety of reasons. If the person says something on Twitter, then they're not a real parent. If it's a white person, then it's not really what Black families want. If it's somebody that shows up to meetings all the time, then we already, know that they're antagonistic towards the administration anyway, and that is a problem. So I'm happy to share like what I've collected via survey. I tried via Twitter today. I was like, maybe if starting a hashtag will help. I'm going to continue to try to think of ways to engage families, because I don't feel like we're actually hearing voices, or we're allowing ourselves to hear voices as a city.
Representative Sutter.
Yeah, I'll try to be brief. I think I actually think we're hearing what is the sort of broad cross section of what is true for families across the city, right? I think we're hearing from families who are joyful about going back. I think we're hearing from families who have nervousness and have decided not to go back. And I think there's a lot of families in the middle. And I think we're all seeing that across the wards, though perhaps for different reasons and with different explanations. I do think this responsiveness is a concern. So one wondering I have for us is if we can think about recommendations that focus on process, on a process of a feedback loop from the administration that goes beyond talking points. We have to be pretty creative on that, but I think that might be an angle or an entry point, which is the way things are working now is not an effective feedback loop. Reiterating your talking points is doing nothing to grow the trust. We do know that there is a recognition by the administration of a lack of trust from families in our education system, and it seems to be something that they do give voice to. Whether or not they're willing to adopt the changes that we think are necessary to engender trust, I think is another question. But I'd love to see us focus our recommendations on process that leads towards greater trust, and how we think we might target our suggestions in that way. The second thing is trickier, but it's one that I'm particularly cognizant of. And I just want us to be careful as we talk about the science, because I think we have good reason to say we're hearing from families these things, even though the CDC says this. What I would hate personally is for the board to be seen as someone who questions the science of the CDC, who questions what the scientists are telling us. And I say this because when you look at the international ways school children are being returned, we in DC, following the CDC guidance, are aligned with a lot of the health recommendations that are out there. For instance, children in Switzerland are not wearing masks when they go back. Children in Germany are not wearing masks when they go back. Children in the UK don't wear masks when they go back, and they've already gone through their Delta phase. There are obviously perhaps more variants to come. Conditions vary. I'm not suggesting we simply pick up what other places are doing, but I do not want our board to be seen as folks who question the science, given that to the best of my knowledge, not a single one of us has a PhD in epidemiology. I do want us to be cautious about what our families want versus what the recommendations may say, and how meeting families where they are is the right thing to engender trust. I personally don't feel comfortable saying, the CDC doesn't know what they're talking about. I have to hope that the scientists at the CDC under a legitimate administration do know what they're talking about, and are making their recommendations in good faith, even if we decide to go above and beyond with our health and safety precautions. That's my personal stance, and I would hope that our board would be thoughtful about how we voice our concerns in relation to needs of parents versus questioning scientific recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I appreciate the recommendation to focus on process. I do want to clarify one thing. There are families who are both excited to be back in buildings and terrified at the same time. Literally, people are like super nervous and super like, I want all the things that my kid misses from being at school. That's so many families. And so I don't want to fall into the trap that I do feel was laid a little bit earlier, that either you celebrate a return to in-person or you poo-poo it, because I actually don't think it's that simple. And I think that making it that simple would not be responsive to families. I'll speak for myself personally, with the guidelines that I know DCPS has, that questioning that is different than questioning the science, right? Like, so there are some places for specificity, like they have on there something about the carbon dioxide monitors and putting those in HVAC zones. What's the HVAC zone? Because the definition is a place that is controlled by its own thermostat, but in buildings like a bar that I was in, the heat is controlled centrally, one building. The HVAC is one air conditioner for each classroom. So which is it? Is it like, how do you go off of therm? So there are questions and places for clarity that I think people can legitimately raise around like what shows up in our guidelines and how is that rolling out without people, going so far as to say like, we don't trust scientists. And so I do want to clarify that as far as at least my perspective.
No, I appreciate that. Representative Reed, and then I'll go, and then we'll go to new business. Representative Wattenberg, I'm assuming you want to comment as well.
Oh, sorry. I was on mute talking. I agree with the point about like, yes, let's look at processes where we can get folks to respond to us. But as I was telling somebody earlier this week, I think folks want to see the science at this rate and feel it, like I feel like we also can be informed, but also people want to just see it. Like, I feel like we also need to be careful about just being too clinical, and also raising the fact that like, there was a period that, especially as an African American person, that science was telling me that I was inferior to white people. Like, I'm just not, it's hard to just say the science says X, Y, and Z, and we just need to lean on that when we're seeing, and I don't want to scare people who are watching, but like, I watched before DC even opened, when Georgia was talking about 3,000 cases of people getting sick. A 14-year-old in Mississippi has passed away. Friend sending me a text message that, or actually an article from that Tallahassee Democrat, that a young person died from COVID, maybe like a couple weeks ago or something like that, possibly contracted in school. So I get that the chances are low, but nobody wants to win the COVID lottery on their child. And if we want to get really technical and, I worry about the liability for forcing people into situations where they're saying, hey, I don't feel comfortable. And this science says you have a low probability, and it just so happens that you be the probability or that chance. So I also want us to just kind of just think about, like, there were some times in science, we learn things, science evolves, just as this virus is evolving. Keeping that in mind, because I think our parents at this point, because how CDC fluctuated and said, bring your mask off, put it back on, people are now kind of like, I don't know who to believe. I'm seeing this. So they want to give it an opportunity to kind of just see, like, okay, well, science is saying this. Let me just make sure it's actually happening in my area, or for folks who look like me, or folks who feel like me. I don't know, but just want to raise that.
Representative Weidenberg.
Yeah, two things. One has already actually been addressed in the chat, but I'll just say it. Part of the issue is the CDC and the science say one thing, but that's not what's happening. The CDC does not say anywhere that I know of that it's okay to have students sitting a foot apart from each other for nearly 2 hours, whether or not they have a mask. Nobody says that. That's not what the CDC recommends, and it's what's going on all the time in lots and lots of schools. Likewise, I don't think the CDC says, you should have hundreds, thousands really, of students in hallways sitting near each other during lunchtime, again, for, an hour and a half. It's not right. And I think this is true across a lot of schools. I think this focus on at least being able to give schools the option of moving outside for lunch, ideally for classes, maybe again, one of these high priority things to really focus on. The other thing I just want to say on the process thing, I mean, we should do whatever we can in terms of the process, but I think our end goal here, the process isn't working. And I think that's really important to recognize. The process isn't working. And we also need to say that we need to have recommendations, not just process, and we need to say the process isn't working. That's all.
Yeah, no, I echo a lot of what everyone has said. I can't help but think back into the original onset of the virus. And we've gone through several phases, as I can recall. I remember when teachers were forced to go back into school buildings. I remember when teachers were vilified and it was framed as though our teachers didn't care about students. And now that we have a vaccine in place, that seems to be off the table. And now the person in the seat are our parents who are saying, you're not listening to me, you're not hearing me. And what I think it highlights is actually the same problem, that our system wasn't honoring what teachers were saying, our system isn't honoring what educators are saying, or our parents are saying. And I also want to give grace, right? Not to any one person, but everyone is trying to figure this out. Nobody was prepared for a pandemic. And so I think there's a lot of grace to be given. But in addition to the systems, I just can't help but think about how are we responding to the concerns of our parents. The other thing I would just name is, as many of you all probably recall, we got a number of emails and calls and messages and tweets and tags and everything else at the end of last school year, where parents, namely in Northwest, I would just name it, demanding that our schools reopen, almost irate. And I can't help but question or wonder the reasons why our city's response to those parents seems so different to the response of parents that are saying, I want a virtual option, or I want something different. Namely, those parents demanding a virtual option, in my perspective, are east of the river, are in Ward 5, are in lower income neighborhoods. And it just, to me, seems like our response as a city to those two groups of parents has been very different. So in addition to just a lack of responsiveness and engagement and systems around how to communicate back, I just continue to wonder why we are addressing different groups of parents' concerns differently. And everybody cares about their children's well-being. And so I just want to, again, thank you all for continuing to talk here. We will follow up with the deputy mayor. So if you, again, have any questions, comments, we will forward that along via staff. And that
Can you give him a timeline to answer?
We can suggest a timeline. And I will say this, I appreciate that we got a response. You know, I'm just going to be, I know we're public. And I'm just going to be real that there have been many letters from the board that have gone unacknowledged, right? And so I agree that it is problematic that we got a response 13 minutes before our meeting. I agree. But it is also noteworthy that they took the time to respond. The question is, why did it come 13 minutes before? And so I welcome the opportunity to follow up with them for sure.
I know. I think it's important. Like, I think when we say give grace, I think we have to be mindful like who we give grace to.
Absolutely.
And I think we give a lot more grace sometimes to people who have a lot more power and authority and resources and privilege than we do to people who don't. So I both can be, you know, appreciative for someone's time and presence, because I believe time is one of the is actually the most important resource you have. It's the one thing you can't get back. So yes, I appreciate the deputy mayor showing up today. I think the space for grace in this conversation, I will mostly reserve for parents and families who are experiencing just a whole bunch of uncertainty and anxiety. And I feel uncomfortable with having those be equal. Yes, some grace to the deputy mayor and some grace to the administration. I'm not envious of the position they're in and the decisions they have to make. But when I think about who gets the most grace, it's the people who are really like turning themselves up in knots right now and have no control over it.
Nor did I suggest that those two were parallel. But my point is, everybody is trying to figure this out. And to be clear, the deputy mayor, the mayor, the administration needs to be held accountable. Our governance system is one in which the mayor sits at the top of it. And so the buck stops with the mayor. And while I acknowledge everyone is trying to figure this out, and the first time in a pandemic for, I would say, mostly everybody, I believe everybody, there's still a lot more to be desired in terms of.
But if they walked into the buildings like we do, and see buildings that are unsafe, that are nasty, that are leaking, that don't have air conditioning in September, there's no grace period for that. There's no grace period for all those work orders at DGS that have been there forever.
Fully agree. Fully agree. Fully agree. Members, are there points of new business?
I don't know if this counts as new business, but I'd just like to take a couple moments to just give a voiceover of some of what I got back. It was only a few questions in the survey. And so let me know if that fits here or if there are other items that
Yep,
we should discuss.
it totally fits.
All right, so I launched a survey actually at my back to school event. So all of the responses did not come from Twitter. I will acknowledge there is an oversampling of Award 7 parents and families because that was roughly 50% of the responses out of a total of about 215 responses. So, and they were more heavily weighted DCPS, about 64% were DCPS, about 38% were public charter schools. And then there were a couple people who actually were homeschools and homeschoolers and private as well. The questions I asked, so how will your children be attending? How will your children or students be attending school this year? 92% said in person, obviously, because DCPS. The rest will be attending virtually. I asked them how comfortable they felt with their children attending school in person. 78 families said they felt absolutely uncomfortable, like they picked one, which was the lowest option. The next highest was actually 2, which was about 35 families. So more than, I guess that's 103 families had very low comfort with sending their kids back. I asked, at this point in the pandemic, if you could choose, would you rather send your students to school virtual or in person? 42% of families said they would send their kids in person if they had a choice, and 57.9% said they would choose a virtual option. I asked families if they would please share why, and I was actually shocked at the amount of people who answered the open-ended question, given I did not make it required. So I got 195 responses to if they would share why. Overwhelmingly, people who said that they would choose a virtual option cited safety issues, things around disabilities, things around not trusting the Delta variant, just having questions around the pandemic and how the protocols worked. Overwhelmingly, people who said they chose a in-person option cited, their kids just missing that interaction, or not feeling like their kid got what they needed from the virtual experience last year. Let me see if there was anything else. I asked people how much they felt they knew about the COVID safety measures for in-person learning. And 88 people out of a little over 200 actually said they felt like they knew like 5, which was everything. And most people felt like they knew a bunch about what was happening. Only 21 people said they knew very little. I also asked like what supports families needed for a successful school year. Overwhelmingly, I saw things around communication, virtual options, better COVID policies. I saw some things around outdoor learning, but not as many. I saw a lot of things around just safety in general. I'm happy to like download this as a PDF and share it to people. But it was my attempt to just get a better sense of like how people were feeling going into this.
Sorry, Emily Rose, did you do this as a survey you sent out, or this was you said at your event, like people filled it out?
How did I conduct the survey? So I made a Google form and I printed out, first I printed out a QR code, and so people were able to take it on their phones at the back to school event. Then I decided, you know what? We're not getting enough feedback. I just felt like we weren't seeing enough feedback. So then I put it on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And I also put it in my newsletter. My email list at this point is probably about 1,500 people. So I sent it out there. But that's how I conducted the survey.
Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Sutter.
Thanks. I know this had come up at our last meeting, and I had raised it with our student reps, and I know they're still getting their bearings and starting their meetings. But I think that since one of our recommendations was a vaccine mandate for 16 plus, and we know there are big disparities in vaccination rates, I would love to see the board take up one way or another a information campaign, whether it be promoting information about or working with students interested in a peer-to-peer program to help understand reasons why some of our young people are not yet vaccinated, and to encourage more vaccination among young people so that we can work on that disparity. And that since it's a recommendation we've put forth, that we're taking some actions towards it. So I definitely want to reconnect with our students once they're able to meet as an advisory committee and find out whether this is an interest that they are taking up. But I'd also love us to think about other ways we are as a adult set of representatives on the board invested in promoting vaccination.
Awesome. Not seeing any other points of new business. Is there a motion to adjourn our meeting?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
And a head nod from Representative Patterson. All in favor of adjourning, please say aye.
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 All opposed, please say nay. Thank you all for a great meeting. This meeting is adjourned at 8:37 p.m. Until next time, stay safe and we'll talk to you soon. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Aye.